Can you please do the roll call?
Supervisor Jurdy.
Here.
And Supervisor Mulhern.
Here. We are going to start with agenda item 2A, discussion and possible action including providing recommendations to staff regarding the local jurisdiction assistant grants program, direct grant and fee waiver program manual, LJAGP program manual, and referral of the LJAGP manual to the Board of Supervisors for approval. And we are joined in chambers today by Director Nevedal. So I'll let you go ahead and start this item off for us.
All right, thank you very much, Supervisor Mulhern. Director Nevedal here regarding local jurisdiction assistance grant program manual. Quite the mouthful. To get started, should I just do a quick overview of the manual itself? Is that?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So in the manual, we've attempted to include the framework in addition to application requirements. The application itself has not yet been drafted. So we did want to, at minimum, highlight or outline the requirements. So the Local Jurisdiction Assistance Grant Program is administered by the Department of Cannabis Control. And the county did receive nearly $18 million in local jurisdiction assistance grant funding, of which approximately $10 million was set aside for the purpose of direct grants to assist provisional license holders with meeting their CEQA requirements so they could qualify for annual licensure. In the manual itself, not only do we explain or describe the administration of the program and that being housed with Department of Cannabis Control, we lay out in section I qualifications and program eligibility. So because this is a program that is aimed at assisting folks achieve annual licensure, minimum requirements for eligibility for a direct grant would include an active or in good standing AG, either application or permit with the county, and additionally a provisional license at the state. I do think there's some questions here about whether or not the deprioritization directive received from the board in May of 2022 would apply. And that directive, mostly what I have questions about as far as eligibility, and I believe we put it in here, is that all commercial cannabis business taxes would have to be paid to the County of Mendocino in order to be eligible to receive direct grant funds. That eligibility requirement does apply to the Local Equity Entrepreneur Program, but at the time of that directive, LJAGP was not included in the directive. Services to be provided, there are some fee waivers that can be provided, and the difference between fee waivers and direct grants should probably be briefly explained. So fee waivers, similarly to the local Equity Entrepreneur Program, are fees associated with the local cannabis operation that are assessed by a county department, which means that we can transfer grant funding to the department directly to cover the fee. So what we see in here is fee waivers for items such as Appendix G processing, because that fee is paid directly to the cannabis department, or special inspection fees. Sometimes folks need one or more additional inspections in order to complete their environmental and performance standard review. Perhaps an inspection might be tied to something like a sensitive species habitat review. Grading permits for approved water conservation projects, lake and streambed alteration agreement work orders, CAL FIRE work orders, or other CEQA related projects as approved by the department. So grading may also be part of, say, a water board work order, but those permits would be acquired through planning and building services, and through this program we would like to offer waivers for that expense. Additionally, demolition permits, which would be offered through planning and building services for the purposes of, say, removing structures from a streamside management area. right? We do have some folks that are engaged in needing those structures removed and then potentially set up elsewhere. And then other permits directly related to meeting CEQA requirements as approved by the Cannabis Department. And we put that in there because it is a little hard to know, as these are site-specific applications, what might come up. But the waiver program is, again, I just want to state, specific to Mendocino County departments and those fees. The reason why that's important to note is because in the direct grant portion of this program manual, we have included fees to state agencies, right? We can't transfer a water board fee or a water monitoring fee, so to speak. So we're trying to highlight here in the direct grant portion of the program manual that those fees may be applicable or eligible for LJAGP funding, but they would have to be written into the direct grant application itself. As far as direct grants, we copied the direct grant categories out of the LJAGP application we submitted that was approved by the state. So I do believe we're limited to these categories, as it's what we not only applied for state funding for, but were approved by the state to offer. So local CEQA document preparation, this could be an Appendix G document preparation for cultivators or nursery operators operating pursuant to Chapter 10A17, but it could also include CEQA document preparation or studies associated with other aspects of the supply chain which are currently still being regulated by Planning and Building Services. Examples of local CEQA document preparation include archaeological or cultural surveys, traffic studies, air quality and greenhouse emission studies, and draft Appendix G preparation. But again, this is not meant to be solely applicable to cultivation and nursery operations. Other aspects of the supply chain, as regulated by Planning and Building Services, are eligible. A second component for direct grant funding is improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Chapter 10A17 does have a clause in it for performance standards that seeks to eliminate the use of generators as a primary power source. Applicants have 2 years after the time of application to manage that performance standard, but we have concerns that folks might be have missed that deadline, so we want to make sure that there is funding available to help make that transition from generators as a primary power source to renewable energy resources. In addition to replacing generators, we also have permission to assist folks with renewable resources to replace or reduce the use of all combustion engines. So we've also named on here water pumps, but I think there's other equipment that may also qualify under this direct grant for funding. Item 3 in direct grants is remediation and relocation to an environmentally superior location. As I mentioned earlier, with demolition permits, we do have some folks that have structures that need to be removed and potentially set up elsewhere to support their operations. Namely, we're seeing folks need to kind of move their cultivation sites and some of their structures out of streamside management areas, but also we've had some instances where folks need to move away from floodplains, as an example. Item 4 is hydrology and improved water quality. This section, or direct grant opportunity, is really focused on ensuring that folks can complete all lake and streambed alteration agreement projects. Once you get through the application or notification process for your lake or stream bed, you still oftentimes have a number of projects that need to be completed on your property. Those projects can be quite costly. And so this includes, as I mentioned, lake or stream bed alteration agreement projects. Some people will need to re-notify, right? So if they have additional projects that Fish and Wildlife would like also included that weren't part of the original notification, We would also like to, with this grant, cover those notification fees, re-notification fees, and folks who started early and received their Lakers Streambed alteration agreement in 2018 are coming up on expiration and will be looking to extend their Lakers Streambed alteration agreement so they can complete their projects. So we have included extension fees in here as well. Also, sometimes it's not just Lakers Streambed alteration agreement projects that need to happen. Other agencies such as the Water Board, the State Water Resource Control Board, may have projects that need to be conducted on the parcel in order to ensure eligibility for annual licensure. So this may need the hiring of consultants. It may also require the payment of fees. And in some cases, your Lakers Streambed alteration agreement may require a Water Board 401 permit, right? So we just want to make sure that the permitting and the projects themselves have the opportunity to be grant funded as they come up for the applicants we're working with. And then C, 4C, is really looked at or really focused on increasing water conservation. So a little bit different from the two sorts of projects for compliance we might see in 4A or 4B. But water conservation was a stated priority of the grant itself. So we thought it made a lot of sense to include it here. The ordinance, Chapter 10A17, does also require in some instances that the applicant have a water availability analysis conducted. We believe that this grant, this direct grant program, should be available to cover such costs as they arrive. But also we want to encourage the installation of water storage systems and systems that help to reduce the amount of water used overall. And consistent with a Lakers Streambed alteration agreement, we have a number of folks that are using surface water and are required to forbear for the summer months. So they need to get ample water storage in place, and that water storage can be costly. Let's see here. Additionally, let's see. Under subsection D, really, this goes back to looking at the need for consultants. So as folks are preparing water availability analysis studies and or working towards completing projects with CDFW or extensions, completing projects with the State Water Resource Control Board, they may very well need assistance through hiring scientists, biologists, and or consultants. So we want to make sure that this grant not only handles the project, but the project development, right, and the execution so that they have access to the permits, the contractors to do the work, and any consulting that they might need leading up to starting those projects and managing those project timelines. I kind of mashed a few of the categories together here. I apologize for that, but I think that provides a pretty thorough overview of the grant categories and what we're hoping to fund. Timeline for application submission. We envision the first opportunity for grant applications to be submitted to be January 16th. We plan on keeping that application submission open for 4 weeks and then using the next 8 weeks to manage the review and award of those grant applications. And then we would open the grant application period again. So basically what we're looking at running is a series of 12-week cycles, right? 4 weeks to apply, 4 to 6 weeks for our department to review those applications, and then another 2 weeks to ensure issuance of checks to support folks. So we did announce on Friday during our public meeting, so folks can find that public meeting on the Cannabis page or the Cannabis program website and the events page, that we would like to open the initial grant application timeline on January 16th of 2023. Applications We would like applications to be submitted on forms provided by the department and in a format prescribed by the department. And we are proposing application direct grant awards of up to $100,000. I realize there's some concerns from advocates and members of the public that $100,000, a $100,000 award may limit the program's availability to around 100 persons or applicants. However, I don't think all applicants are going to be eligible for $100,000, right? The purpose of this direct grant program is, again, to ensure that folks have the funding they need to meet their CEQA requirements so that they are eligible for annual licensure. And not everyone is going to need $100,000 of CEQA support to ensure that they are eligible for annual licensure. But the reason for such a large award is that we are aware of at least 2 individuals that have very large lake or stream bed alteration agreement projects that are going to probably push over $100,000, and it's likely that there's more out there. Those projects can be costly, especially when they include, say, legacy issues that aren't part of the cultivation site, and then they do need to be completed in order for eligibility for annual licensure. Let's see. My pages are out of order. My apologies. Looking at the use of direct grant awards, this guidance was provided by County Council for the Local Equity Entrepreneur Program, and we just kind of customized it by removing the local equity references and replacing them with local jurisdiction assistance grant program references. So this language, the use of direct grant awards, is what we've been using with local equity applicants. So I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Great, thank you. I'll ask Supervisor Jardy, did you have any questions on the proposed grant and fee waiver program manual?
Yeah, thank you. So my question, so this is a draft document that you're submitting first to the General Government Committee and then to the board, I understand. Is this document also going to the state for their approval?
No, we are not required to submit this to the state for approval.
So the question I had has to do with the payments of the funds. And if I'm reading it correctly, it looks like an applicant, let's say they had the maximum award of $100,000, but regardless, if I'm reading it correctly, it looks like they're eligible to receive up to 50% more or less up front before receipts are submitted?
That is correct. So it's, I don't believe that most of our applicants would have the ability to reap the benefits of this program if we made it a fully in arrears program, which is an option. But the concern here is that it's likely most of our applicants will need some funding to get those projects going. And I did notice that there were some comments about concerns that 50% of $100,000, as an example, might not be enough for a project to get started. We could consider putting a clause into the program manual that allowed the director of the department to, in specific situations, exceed the 50% limit. But we want to kind of slow the pace of awarding monies with this program as we're looking at a much larger dollar amount.
Well, my principal concern is if the state has no concern with that, then I'm not concerned. But I guess I have a potential concern if they're unaware of how much money we may be awarding to applicants prior to receipts. And the worst case scenario would be half a dozen or so applicants get the grants and don't really proceed with their projects and sell their property and leave. And then in my mind, the worst case scenario is the state comes in and says, we want to review your bookkeeping and the success of this program, and we're not happy that you awarded so much money up front. We were unaware of that, and then makes the county general fund reimburse the state. So my main concern is I want to make sure that whatever we're doing, that we have some sort of written confirmation from the state that they're okay with our procedure, so that we don't have bad news in terms of the county general fund a year or two down the road.
Thank you, Supervisor Jurdy. I believe that County Council has an answer to that question or concern.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we do have from the state at this point is a statement that essentially the county is responsible for developing policies to make sure that the funds are spent only on eligible uses and for conducting audits, et cetera, to make sure that that is the case. I don't know, and Director Nevedal can correct me as to whether they've weighed in specifically on the process of paying in advance. My understanding is that's relatively unusual in a grant program, although there's specific reasons for it in this context. We could follow up and ask the state for a little bit more confirmation. I will say what they've given us so far has been relatively vague. They want to see some level of due diligence on the county's part, but they haven't been very specific as to what that would mean.
And
Again, if they're okay with it, and they want to provide that in writing, that's fantastic. I just have not seen a state grant that typically it's a nonprofit or a government agency receives where it was anything other than a reimbursement program from the state.
Go ahead, Director Nevedal.
yes, and thank you much. So this is also how the local equity entrepreneur grant program is run. Those awards are upfront and not in arrears. Currently, we are issuing $50,000 checks maximum to folks who come through the local equity entrepreneur program. So the goal of the LJAGP direct grant is also to prioritize local equity entrepreneur applicants. So it is analogous in that manner to what we're already doing with the LEAP program. But again, I am happy to reach out to the state if you'd like me to.
Well, I'll just say that on this particular item, I felt pretty satisfied with with the 2B and then the Cannabis Department's obligations to the state to manage the direct funds. And so it's 2B3, so page 6, and that the county would notify GoBiz if there was any concerns about potential misuse, and that we would try to remedy this situation. I think that's probably doing our due diligence. And as we've discussed at previous meetings, these are all fairly new programs that are rolling out statewide. So I don't expect that other county departments are also going to have the same questions and processes. But Supervisor Jurdy, are you asking for something more than that? I'm not sure that the state's going to provide us anything in writing, but is that your request?
Yes, that if we adopt this manual, that we would like to see their, I guess, blessing, because it's proposing a 50% advance payment before their receipts.
Okay. I see the director is noting that. Thank you. What I would like to do now is open up the floor for public comment, and we do have folks in the room as well as on Zoom. So I'll be monitoring both of those, and if you're on Zoom and can use the hand raise icon to let me know that you would like to speak. We will be using the 3-minute timer. However, the Supervisor Jurdy or myself can also ask clarifying questions of any speaker as needed. And I'll go ahead and open the floor. Hopefully, Supervisor Jurdy, you have the e-comments tab pulled up so that you're able to see the most recent comments that have come in today. And I'll go ahead and open the floor here in the room for anybody that would like to come forward and provide public comment.
Good afternoon, Paul Hansberry. I have a few things. With regards to what the scenario that Supervisor Jurdy was talking about, it seems to me that would constitute fraud, and it would be more of a criminal thing than a requirement for the program. So that requirement, so they're giving $50,000 checks as we speak for the LEAP program, and I don't think we've had any problems with that. As far as the state coming back, I believe the state has already mentioned that if there was a misuse of funds, that you would just use your standard debt collection procedures, and if the debt was uncollectible, that the county would not be responsible for repayment. So those sorts of things are to be thought about, I think. Although I understand that county council it's his responsibility to reduce the liability for the county, and that's great. In my opinion, he's a bit over-enthusiastic with that, to the point of delaying the program, but that's just my opinion. The LJAGP program is supposed to be for advancing through to get to annual licensure for the state. I would like to apply for this for water catchment, a rain catchment system, but it isn't necessarily required for me because I have a groundwater well. Now, if we're trying to preserve the groundwater, that's one thing, but it isn't necessarily required. So I'm concerned and anxious as to what I can put into my direct grant program, if it's going to be eligible, if it's going to fly. I'd like to make the application that it's reviewable and approvable, the first time without having to be reviewed. I'd like to do it right the first time. So I'd like to know if that's an option for me, since I do have groundwater. And the third is the reporting for the receipts within 1 week. That's going to be problematic because even with the local equity entrepreneur program, there still is no way to report the receipts. In other jurisdictions, they have a vehicle for it, but it's by each characteristic, each zone, whether it's rent or this different. It doesn't. The way the program is with Mendocino County, it's item by item by item, and using their system that they have in place would be like throwing all the receipts in a shoebox and wouldn't be reviewable. I've tried on a couple of different occasions, and so I'm just wondering if that's going to be addressed if you're going to enforce the 1 week time frame for once the money has been spent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I'm glad that we're having these cannabis discussions at GGC is that we have a little bit more time to really have conversations about questions and concerns from the public. So as I read the suggested program manual, anybody that needs additional options for water, for rain catchment or water conservation would be eligible. So I'm not sure why there would be a concern about that. Do you feel that there are concerns, Director Nevedal?
I do. I also believe that anyone who has the provisional license at the state and an active application and or permit locally would be eligible, and that's even a non-cultivator.
Thank you very much. And then the other thing is, when the application is released, will there be able to have a form or attachment that's really going to clarify what it is that you're needing on a weekly basis, so that'll be very clear to the applicants what the requirements are?
Yeah, the requirements are going to be specific to the application submitted by the individual, right? So, and specific to their timeline. So, if we're looking at, say, the purchase of culverts and materials to conduct Lake or Streambed Alteration Agreement projects, and that's part of their first timeline and benchmark, we would want to be receiving those receipts within a week of those purchases, which would also set us up and set the applicant up to issue a second check in a timely manner. So I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did, but the presentation of receipts does coincide with the timeline, so to speak, or hopefully will. And the form itself will be a combination of check the boxes and provide additional narrative where necessary, and provide attachments such as invoices or estimated cost quotes that you've received.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and move to Michael Katz on Zoom. So, Michael, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Yes, good afternoon, supervisors. This is Michael Katz, Executive Director of the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. Thank you for having this meeting and for being open to a more open format. I want to address first the comments of Supervisor Jurdy related to the state allowances. I think that, as you mentioned, you've never seen this happen in any grant before, and the state is very good at setting regulations where and when they want to and how they want to see things. And the reason that this program and the equity program have been so intentionally vague is because the needs are different than in any other sector and in this way than in any other industry in the history of, your supervisorship. So, this is a new program, as Supervisor Mulhern said, and if the state wanted limitations like the one you're suggesting, I believe they already would have made that clear. The concern on the 100K per applicant, thank you, Director Nevedal, for mentioning that. And understandably, not everybody is going to need that threshold, but understanding that we do have somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 operators, at least 200 of them, which have already been designated as equity operators. We're just wondering if there has been any thought into how those allocations will be prioritized and how those funding decisions will be made. And so we recommend stakeholder meetings to be held as soon as possible to discuss this and to then have the input from that be brought back to this committee or the board, whichever is more expeditious, to discuss that. We understand that the intention is to prioritize equity operators, but we also obviously understand that there's been the equity program providing funding that other folks who are still suffering significantly do not have access to. So wondering what the thought has been as far as what will be allocated for non-equity operators out of this 10 million. As far as the tracking that was just discussed, the reporting every week, that does seem a little onerous, and wondering if the funds can be, if reporting can happen in advance of the request of the new funding, as Director Nevedal stated, since those are required, as long as they're saving their receipts, and then by the time they need their next, in order to get their next tranche, could that be useful? On the direct grants, we had several questions related to streamlining and making sure that there aren't overly onerous reporting and narrative requirements if certain information provided. We want to make sure that there isn't duplicative information being requested. And we're wondering if the as far as tracking the use of funds, as I said, that it be a less onerous process on the operators. And we're committed to working with everyone on this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. As far as the weekly reporting, if you're paying somebody, a consultant or a contractor to do this work, it is likely that those are not $5.95 at the hardware store. I mean, we are likely talking about large receipts. So I personally don't believe that the reporting after you've used the funds is going to be as much as a challenge as is being presented. Am I just misreading something?
Well, if I may, through the chair, I think there's a little confusion about what item 4.1b says. So we are not suggesting that there's weekly reporting required. We're suggesting that the awardee within a week of spending funds presents that receipt and reports the spending of funds. So this is really a measure, my understanding, aimed at just ensuring that we're getting the information in a timely manner. So if I spend $25,000 in week 1, I should be reporting that to the department in week 2. So it's not a weekly reporting requirement. It's a requirement to provide your receipts within 1 week of spending down your funds.
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarification. And did you have, were you gonna, I mean, personally, and Supervisor Jurdy, I'm happy to have you weigh in. I think that the GGC is the appropriate committee to bring your suggestions or thoughts to as far as the community stakeholders. So at this point, I don't think additional community stakeholder meetings are needed unless it's part of an MCD update. If there's thoughts that people would like to share, they can go ahead and submit that ahead of the meeting in public comment or use the public expression format during the meeting. Can the department speak to a little bit about what the rolling out is going to look like once you've received all of the applications? Is it first come, first serve? Is it based on need? What are the thoughts so far within the department on that?
Thank you for that. Right now, I'm not exactly sure what we'll expect to see as far as volume, but I do want to emphasize that we are not currently planning to review incomplete applications. So we'll be sorting through applications received and looking at them for completeness, and then only reviewing the applications that appear to be complete. In the Local Equity Entrepreneur Program, we receive applications and are committed to working with each and every applicant until their application is awardable. This will not operate the same way, right? We'll open the application period, we'll close it, we'll conduct the reviews. If there's not complete information, we will not award that grant. We'll only award grants that are complete and qualify, meet all of the eligibility criteria, and have projects that are associated with CEQA compliance or the scope outlined in the direct grant program proposal.
Thank you. I'm now going to go to public expression in the room, and then I'll go to Zoom and Blair Auclair.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Supervisor Mulhern, Supervisor Jurdy, and staff. We very much appreciate the format of these meetings where we can be a little more expansive in Q&A and finding out things that will help us as small operators. Regarding that, Supervisor Jurdy, you expressed an interesting and very real concern about what would happen if a grant was awarded and the awardee ended up selling the property. And I'm wondering if we could put that or ask County Council to take a look at that and perhaps create a document where the grant would become null and void should a property sale occur. That being said, for all of us who are really hanging on by our fingernails in terms of these grants, if we ourselves had $100,000, we wouldn't be here in front of you. The chances that that sort of malfeasance is going to occur seems to be fairly slim. Regarding the state's position and GoBiz, as a previous speaker mentioned, GoBiz has issued a document where they're very clear about debt collection, recovery, and should that not happen, release of liability for the county. So I'm wondering if we could take a look at that document and maybe tweak it a little bit with GoBusiness help so that it would cover our concerns as a county. In terms of the award amount, we are hoping that in past times, a large grant was to have been in 2 tranches to lower the tax liability. We're not trying to get out of paying taxes. It's just a huge amount of money can pose some problems. We're hoping going forward we can look particularly at, say, $100,000 as being in 2 tranches. Finally, in terms of continuing changing and unfortunately worsening climatic conditions, as we look at applications, I'm wondering if we can be mindful of a water table that is continuing to drop in Mendocino County, of fire conditions that are continuing to change. And so rather than penalize applicants, I'm hoping that we will be given a chance to work together. And finally, as Director Nevedal mentioned, LJAGP applications will not be processed if not complete. We hope that there might be a way you could at least let us know what's missing and give us a day or two to correct, rather than just be thrown to the bottom of the pile. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Nevedal, can you address what the process would look like if an application was not submitted completely?
At this time, we're planning to allow folks to reapply during the next submission process. So we are not planning on having a back and forth with applicants to try to bring those applications into a complete status during the review process. I think we absolutely can send notes back when we return the applications or announce awardees and folks who weren't awarded, so that folks who weren't awarded better understand what was incomplete or the reason why they weren't awarded, so they can make amendments for the next application period.
Thank you. And I guess this question is for Supervisor Jordy because, and the department, but I really don't feel like it's the department's obligation to manage individuals' tax obligations. If there's an individual business that wishes to receive grant funds and somehow wants it to be on a different timeline, half in 1 year and half in the other, I don't know that that's the department's obligation to manage that. What is the timeline with which an awardee can spend down the grants?
If we were to follow what we've got in place for local equity entrepreneur program, which I would recommend, it would be 1 year to spend down the funds plus an additional 6 months to complete any outstanding reconciliation of receipts.
Well, Supervisor Jordy, I don't know how you feel. I mean, I feel as though that's kind of up to the grant awardee to figure out what it is, when it is that they need to seek reimbursement and how they manage their projects.
Yeah, I agree. I think people can just sort of time their request for the funds.
Okay, Blair, please unmute.
Hi, this is Blair. I'm actually going to pass the phone to my mom who is here, who's had, can you hear me? Okay, yeah, I'm gonna pass the phone to my mom who's been an executive managing over $20 million grant annually for over 20 years. Just wanted to give, she was just listening and hanging out and wanted to give a little information.
Hi, my name's Angela Carone, and I am a property owner here in Mendocino and work with my daughter here as well. So I just was surprised by the 1 week turnaround being required for grantees to submit documentation. Again, I have over 20 years experience in grant management with both federal, state, and private grants. And we've never provided such a short turnaround. And this was to organizations that had staff managing grants that had the ability to report and all. I see what these young people go through and what it requires. And a 1 week turnaround is really not a reasonable amount of time for them to be able to submit the documentation with everything else that they've got going on. We allowed at least 1 to 3 months at the end of the grant period for reporting. And this was on grants where we advanced the full amount of grants that often were several $100,000 annually. So thank you for the opportunity to weigh in to try and make this program as successful as possible.
Thank you. We'll go back into the room, and it looks like Hannah.
Good afternoon, Hannah Nelson. Thanks for this conversation. I think that a lot of useful information has come out and some additional questions that I have. One is with respect to the timeline of, the aspirational timeline of the rollout. I guess the question is that feasible? And I certainly understand that that's the desire, but given what has happened so far, and granted, we're smoothing out the challenges that happened with the equity grant and building upon their knowledge base, but I just wonder how feasible that is. And that kind of ties back to the whole timing of when you apply for your grant or when you're getting work done or how much, whether you're going to have to get new quotes and everything like that. So I think that building a program that accounts for things not going as well as we hope they will is important, because otherwise trying to change the mechanics as those adjustments occur is more difficult. So I would encourage looking at some ranges, not only on the program side, but on the recipient side, depending on how they're impacted by any delays or weather or times of year that work can be done or any of that stuff. So I really encourage looking at that. Also, along those lines, I think that broadening the categories, or at least using language such as these are examples but not limited to, might be helpful, because there may be items that we're not imagining right now that certainly squarely fit within the allowable confines of getting to an annual license that we just haven't dreamt up now. And I would ask that any questions that are being asked of the state, that we try to dream up every single question that's relevant to the state and ask in one batch and follow up with those answers as diligently as possible. Because in the past, what's happened is we have a question and then we have to wait for the state to answer and then have another question, et cetera. So I think that's important. Also, I hope that if there's only a one-time shot in the first round of applying, and these are new forms and new processes and new language, that perhaps there will be in-person workshops to help people understand what's really needed in advance of their submission. Because, again, with new forms, new language, I think it's very easy to understand that it might be very clear in the department's head of what they meant. It may not be as clear on the other end, since it's a brand new program. And with respect to something that Susan said regarding, unlikely that malfeasance would happen, and I just want to say, I echo the concerns that the money up front is needed to be able to engage in these projects. And I wonder, I hate to raise this as a possibility, but I wonder if direct payments with the consultants or engineers or whoever it is that's being hired by the applicant is one way to balance the interest of making sure that the money is going for the project, but at the same time, not having the challenge of the delays and then the readjustments and all of that stuff. And quite, jokingly, I was going to say that nobody would probably take that money and go off to Tahiti because it takes so much to apply. But I do think that the time request for funds and the whole timing of it is really important to look at in the context of how is the work going to be performed or done, and whether or not the contractor or whoever is, if there is such a person, an environmental consultant, whatever, is able to perform their work and also invoice for their work and everything else. So I just ask that those things be looked at in combination. Thank you. Okay.
Director Neville, when I read the draft manual and it says, fee waivers, and then lists other permits directly related to meeting CEQA requirements approved the cannabis department, that's a local fee waiver. I think the direct grants section for state grants is a little more prescribed. The other categories already say other equipment as approved or other remediation or relocation as approved. In my mind, when I read this in advance, I felt like we were getting enough wiggle room, except for maybe in what the state grants would qualify for. Did the department have any concerns about not being flexible enough with this document?
I think we have asked for additional guidance from the state to see if we can expand the waivers, right? So one of the questions we asked the state that we have not received a response for is if building permits could be included under the waiver program, since building permits are required and do essentially provide the CEQA compliance for the structure itself. So I am hoping we'll be able to add that, but we would not need a program manual change to do that because of what we've put into item. Well, it's what we put into the section. The reason for adding other permits as approved, right? It's because we have that outstanding. As far as the direct grant categories, these were proposed to the state when we applied for the LJAGP grant. If we wanted to expand categories, right, we wanted to offer direct grants for items above and beyond water conservation, hydrology and improved water quality, remediation and relocation, or beyond CEQA document preparation or lake or streambed alteration agreement projects, right? If we wanted to provide direct grants beyond what's listed in here in this program manual, we would have to seek approval from the state ahead of time. It would be an amendment to our or the county's grant application with Department of Cannabis Control.
Okay, and what are your thoughts on whether or not that would be approved, or what, if that would delay the?
At this point, it would delay the program.
Okay.
We would have to do a formal application amendment and wait for a response before we could move forward with the program manual. Now, I think if there's items that become commonly asked for, so to speak, to aid in CEQA, the first thing we would do would go to the state and see if there's a way we can expand and cover those items. But it is my belief that what we've shaped here to date and what we shaped, which reflects what we shaped for the grant application, is inclusive of all stated goals of the local jurisdiction assistance grant program provided by the state.
And I would assume that we're not going to have any shortage of applicants that need these funds, as it were.
I would assume not.
Okay, I had a question, I think a clarifying question for the community. So if I'm a grant recipient and I receive $100,000 for a project for some type of hydrology project, for a water project, and I request $50,000 right up front, and I receive those funds, and my contractor that I'm using, whether that's a consultant or construction contractor, immediately requests another $25,000 from me, I guess my question is, could I submit my receipt for the $25,000 and then be, whatever, in that next batch for checks so that I can go ahead and get that invoice paid, or is there a timeline that I'm going to have to wait?
There's not a timeline. What we've crafted what we've proposed in the program manual is that as an awardee, you would need to spend down 80% of the initial funding amount. So if you had $100,000 of grant award and you received $50,000, in order to get the next $25,000, so to speak, you would have to provide receipts that showed you had spent down 80% of that initial $50,000.
Thank you. So I think that, I guess what I was hoping to receive clarification on for the community is that, yes, you can spend down your grant award as needed, as long as you're paying those consultants or those contractors to get the project done. Those funds are going to be available for you to use.
Yeah, so if you have $100,000 in lake or stream alteration agreement projects and we issue you a check for $50,000 and you turn around and spend the first, 80% of that first $50,000 in 2 weeks getting the supplies delivered to your property, you can, in the third week, receive yet another check. Give or take the timing it takes us to cut the check, but yes.
Sure. I think it's important for the potential grantorees to understand that the funds will be available for them to use as they are needed. So we'll go back to public expression in the room.
Good afternoon, everybody. My first name is Chantal. My last name is Simone Pietri. Hi. I'm a private consultant working in environmental compliance and also a grant writer and program manager for grants. These comments are specific to the LJAGP program. I also submitted comments per agenda item through Granicus earlier today. To start with, I have a couple of questions regarding other state agencies that are implicated in the grant program itself. In the example manual, it talks about fees and compliance processes for the State Water Resources Control Board and also the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm wondering whether those agencies were consulted with how this grant would apply to the programs that they require for compliance. I can wait for an answer. I can just go on with all my comment.
Go ahead and just answer that one, might be easier.
The department did not consult with the other agencies. The Department of Cannabis Control knows that this is what we're proposing. So they were consulted in that regard.
Great. I'll go off of that. Thank you, Ms. Nevedal. In my experience, I've worked as an environmental compliance consultant since we had what was called the pilot program at the time here in Region 1. Our region geographically for the Water Board and also for Fish and Wildlife is Region 1. And the regulations and implementation of those in Region 1 differ than they do for the rest of the state. And so although consultation with the DCC is an excellent step, I strongly advise that this grant manual be run by our Region 1 Water Board staff as well as our Region 1 Fish and Wildlife permitting and enforcement staff so that they have an idea as far as what the county is developing in a program that will help assist it with the compliance that those departments require. As they're the ones that are applying the requirements, it's fantastic for us to come up with this program that allows funding to cover the costs, but it seems to me that a step was missed without having consulted with them. Additionally, as far as other outside consultation that I recommend, there is a very specific, robust, and long-standing restoration grant program administered by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. There's a watershed restoration grants program, there's a fisheries restoration grant program, and over the last 2 years, they have created and have been implementing a cannabis restoration grant program. It's called the CRGP. I am one of the first applicants in partnership with the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District to apply successfully for funds for cannabis cultivators in the Bell Springs area. I've since submitted 2 other applications, and I'm new to grant writing. I am trained as a lawyer and a hydrologist. I have got experience with writing, so it wasn't so complex to learn, but in my experience working with the CRGP program, it is extremely robust and specific with very clear technical scoring criteria and grant goals and a clear delineated process for the applicant to know what they are trying to achieve. How does their application meet what the stated goals of the program are? And I understand that this is a draft manual. It's not the procedures and guidance documents, the next level of administrative paperwork, but I strongly suggest that at this stage that there be outside consultation to CRGP so that they can weigh in as well so that the program that you're drafting meets and is cooperative with what they already administer. The director of the CRGP program for the cannabis program, her name is Virginia O'Rourke. She's a Fort Bragg resident. She's aware of this LJAGP program. I presented it to her on Friday, and she would love to be able to talk to you, Ms. Nevedal, to talk through how their grant program could work cooperatively with this one. In general, I would say that this draft manual is just that. I'd say it's something around like 50 to 75% complete, but it lacks significant amount of information and detail before be referred to the Board of Supervisors, and I would ask that it stay here with the GGC for the duration of time until it's ready to move forward, whether that is the full day of today or additional meetings of the GGC. I do think that stakeholder meetings are different from just the GGC meetings, although you stated that, Ms. Mulheron, that we could have the stakeholder meetings be the equivalent to the GGC. And I think that there is still a sense in the larger community that there has not been the quantity of give and take of information between the stakeholder population and the decision makers. And as those stakeholders are the ones that are regulated, there still is a feeling of there being a gap in communication. And so however this can be, let's just continue to make efforts for there to be opinions heard and changes in implementation so that those that are being regulated feel engaged in the process rather than disenfranchised. Right now, I still think the relationship between the entities of the permittee and the permittor is still fairly poor. I have two other small comments. I'll go through them really quickly regarding the LJAGP, and then I can stop. On the reporting time period, I agree with the commenter, Blair's mother, who gave her comment. All of the grants that I've worked under, all of them require a 30-day reporting period, and that being fairly common, that allows the contractor that you hire to actually issue you a receipt. Many of them work on monthly billing cycles, and working in a 7-day time period, it's just not reasonable in normal business practice. I also raised the question regarding contingency considerations that all the grants I'm working on right now, with the cost of material supplies, and particularly steel, which is a fundamental factor in culverts, that steel prices have gone up by about 40% annually, and in some cases are jumping about 10% per month. So any agreed upon quote would, in the grants I'm working through now, it's a ongoing process and communication about how do we adjust the grant amount so that it can still accomplish the goals of what was approved, provide the deliverable to the grantor, that there is a contract that's written that says, we'll give you this money for you to do that, and you have to follow through with it on a certain time period. And contingencies is something that needs to be very well, if not like specifically delineated, at least acknowledge that contingencies, including changes in materials costs, there's a way for those to be thought through in advance, so they're not after the fact pushing the recipient up against a wall of where they can't get any more funds. Two other comments, I would strongly suggest that there be no upper cap of the $100,000 limit. And if there is going to be any, because in my experience of permitting and on-the-ground implementation of technical projects such as LSA implementation, $100,000 is a very small amount of money. If you're including a pond, ponds run about $60,000 just for the equipment operation. That does not include any sort of liner, which could be synthetic or clay. It doesn't include engineering design or a grading permit from the county. Culvert cost generally depends, like a 40-foot long, 2-foot wide culvert can run somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 depending upon when and where you source it from. So just of the quick list of like pond, tanks, power supply changes, road improvements as being some of the priorities under the 5 categories, those easily total to above $100,000. So another question I asked in the bigger picture is, how is this program going to align with the LEAP program that's already in existence and any other grant programs that the applicant may be going for, that there should be some way that, I'd like to hear better from the department, how are they going to be cooperative? And coming back to the cap, I again go back to like, what are the review criteria going to be? How are applications going to be scored? And what is the prioritization for awards? Is this a competitive or a non-competitive program? It appears to me to kind of fall in both categories, where we know there's a limited pool of money and we're capping the quantity of money individuals can apply for, but we're not clear yet, other than assisting people with overcoming the obstacles to obtaining their annual, which is one of the designated things as CEQA. There's many other on the property structural and permitting improvements that could fall into that category. And I'm not clear, if I was a potential applicant, what would be best for me to bring to this program versus bringing to the CRGP program versus bringing to LEAP. Thank you.
Director Nevedal, can you address maybe some of those concerns, the concerns about how our grant program would work with other state programs? And specifically with the agencies where we would essentially be paying for the technical assistance for our applicants to be able to get through the process with those state agencies. Do we have concerns as a department about how this would work?
Currently, no. And the other grant programs that are offered by Department of Fish and Wildlife do require the applicant to work with a nonprofit entity, so they cannot receive the funding directly. It has to go through a third-party nonprofit entity or an agency. So these grants would not have that same requirement. They would be directly awarded to the applicant. As far as allowing grant funding to be utilized for the drafting of the grant, I do not believe that it's an eligible use of LJAGP funds to allow LJAGP direct grant funds to be utilized for the purpose of writing or the technical support for drafting a grant submission to the department. I'm more than happy to check in with Department of Fish and Wildlife to see if there's a way we can be more cooperative in how grant monies are spent. But what I would caution against would be holding up the release or the implementation of the LJAGP direct grant funding for, say, a revisiting or a revamping of the program manual that provides input from all resource agencies and a roadmap for how one might use the funds together. I think that could take quite some time to sort through, and this is a program that's independent of Department of Fish and Wildlife's grant funding programs.
And does your team have a plan for a tutorial on how to use the application so the applicants are better prepared for submission time?
I imagine we'll run a number of public meetings. We generally do before we release anything. So we'll be crafting the application. We'll want to make sure that the application is available at least 30 days in advance. Because of the holiday, I'd like to get the application out to the public by December 1st. That's my hope and goal. And then we would schedule some Friday meetings to discuss using that application and what's expected.
Okay, and I know that for some people, $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but for others, it isn't. Should applicants build into their application, a contingency or a buffer at the top so they don't max out over 100,000? Or what was the thought process within the department for 100,000 being the cap and the projects that may have fluctuating expenses like materials?
Well, I think if an applicant is applying for a $100,000 grant, let's say, right, but they have a $200,000 project, they'll want to show the entire cost of that $200,000 project. And based on experience from the local equity entrepreneur program, I expect we'll want to see proof of funds for the applicant to cover the remainder of that project so that we can ensure that funding $100,000 worth of a $200,000 project will result in a completed project. I think that's probably going to be an important piece, and based on guidance from County Council, seems to be crucial to the success of this program going forward.
Thank you. And we'll go back to public expression in the room.
Corinne Powell, thank you very much for this opportunity and for this forum. The more the better. Hope they can keep on coming. I had a concern in reading through the allowable categories for these grant funds, and I'm a little concerned that potentially cultivators in particular could run up against a problem where the regulations of the county are onerous to the point of being unaffordable, whereas they don't raise to the threshold of environmental issues per se, as analyzed by CEQA and other agency concerns. For example, we haven't heard yet from Julia from Planning and Building Services regarding how she can potentially offer suggestions around uses for ag exempt structures, not needing necessarily an F1 structure, using the utility classification of buildings in Mendocino County for various types of processing work, things that the stakeholders have been asking for quite some time. And if for any particular reason a cultivator cannot manage some of the structural requirements that the county has, and that might jeopardize their local permit, how can potentially some of these funds be applied to regulations in the county for structures and structural uses? Thank you.
Director Nevedal, would an applicant be able to use these grant funds for those types of uses through planning and building with the remediation and relocation funds? What does that look like?
I mean, I believe if the reason for eliminating use of a structure is to ensure that that structure is no longer posing an environmental risk, such as removing it from a streamside management area or from within a floodplain, then the new structure, in addition to the elimination of the existing structure, would be covered by this grant program. However, if someone wishes to, say, process and have employees and has the need for an F1 structure, the development of that F1 structure would not be covered by this direct grant program and would be better suited in an application to the local equity entrepreneur program, which has a much broader scope of allowances. ADA is currently considered an eligible use under the local equity entrepreneur program.
So I've been grateful to take the opportunity to make these meetings more flexible so that we can have a dialogue and a conversation. We do have a time limit. So I would like to, it looks like we have one more public comment in the room, and I don't see anybody online. So if maybe we could get
quick.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Hannah Nelson. Again, just really quick, some nuts and bolts things that would be great to nail down. One is that if the whatever workshops might be had with the public, if they could be interactive, because again, this is new stuff, I think that would be really, really helpful. Also, along those lines, in terms of synthesizing with or having advice, and I know that Ms. Nevedal and I were able to work in a technical assistance workshop on somebody's situation, and we identified, what would be good for LJAGP versus LEAP versus whatever, and that was so helpful, and I think that people would really benefit from that kind of guidance because the department has firmly in their mind what is applicable and what's going to fit most easily in which categories. So to the extent that through whatever mechanism, that kind of opportunity to review somebody's situation and say, yeah, this is how we can leverage the grants, at least that are within-house. Maybe it's not possible to do with outside state grants, but at least leverage that. And then the other thing that I would really ask is if we could go through that manual and see, or the final version be making sure that the reporting is detailed and making sure that there's the level of accountability that's needed, but not duplicative. So for example, if somebody already wrote the narrative in their proposal and they're submitting the receipts, do they really need to write a narrative? Maybe so if things have changed or it's being adjusted or time frame's different, but to the extent that we could really look at streamlining, but without the loss of accountability, that would be excellent. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring it back to the committee. Supervisor Jurdy, after hearing public comment and beyond your initial request for clarification from the state, did you have any suggested changes to the draft program manual?
I don't have suggested changes in the manual. I did want to just recognize and appreciate the suggestion that the cannabis program circle back with California Fish and Wildlife. I was unaware that they may have some grants that some of the same applicants may be seeking, and I don't think it's really within the scope probably of our limited staff to help applicants, write their grant applications so they can maximize both the Fish and Wildlife grant if they're eligible and this grant. But it certainly would be helpful if our staff was, fully aware of that grant program, and just to make sure we aren't inadvertently creating something that's somehow hindering someone from maximizing both grants.
Director Nivedal, did you have any final comments that you wanted to add?
Well, if I may just repeat the recommendations that I believe I've heard in regards to the manual to make sure that I've captured them.
Sure.
That'd be okay?
Yeah.
So I believe there's a request to seek approval for the draft manual from the Department of Cannabis Control in time for the manual to go in front of the full Board of Supervisors. And I've also noted a recommendation to check in with California Department of Fish and Wildlife, namely Virginia O'Rourke, who is leading up the direct grant programs with Department of Fish and Wildlife. Those are the two recommendations I've captured thus far.
Thank you. And do you have a timeline yet with the clerk of the board about when you expect this to come back for the board? Because I think it would be important that when it is agendized for the full board that it has timelines listed and possibly even some meeting dates proposed for announcing the applications to the community, or that more workshop style conversation that you'll be having. It's okay if you don't yet have the date. We can just discuss it later.
I do.
Okay.
We have scheduled it for November 1st. So I would then follow through with my outreach this week so that we could try to bring that information back. And I am more than happy to release the timeline during that meeting that we discussed today. I have it mapped out. One of the goals with the timeline and keeping it to 12-week increments is that it allows for a couple rounds of grant awards before we move into the 2023 work season. The vast majority of the projects included in this direct grant program will be capital improvement projects. Then the work will need to be conducted during the DFW recognized work season.
Great, thank you. Do I need Director Jardy to?
That accurately summarized my request. Is there anything else?
No. I have to ask if that's the recommended action.
Sure, that sounds like I would concur with that as the recommended action.
Okay, thank you. And roll call vote?
Supervisor Jardy,
Yes.
Supervisor Mulhern.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 2B, discussion and possible action including providing recommendations to staff and a referral to the Board of Supervisors regarding the streamlining of cannabis department programs and Chapter 10A-17. And according to our agenda where we left off were items. Eight, 11, and 12 from the memo to come back to this committee. Clerk, did you have something you wanted to add? Okay, I stand corrected. That's 3, 8, 9, 11, and 12. Okay. turned off my mic. Director Nevedal, did you want to begin with number 3?
Sure, and maybe it might be helpful to just do a quick overview of why we aren't reviewing all of these recommendations, but we have the full document here, if that would be all right with you?
Please do.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So on October 4th, the Board of Supervisors did start working through or heard the cannabis ad hoc recommendations, but we did not make it through all recommendations. So item 1 did have a directive included, 1A specifically, and that directive was to direct staff to ensure an expeditious approach to reviewing LEAP applications, not to get lost in minutia, take actions that don't result in clawback of funds, and be as reasonable as possible. That was the only directive that came out of these items that apply to cannabis department staff. Planning and Building Services was directed to pursue 2 additional items. And so they are diligently managing that and working through those portions. Item 3 specifically, if I may just jump into the outstanding items, is a recommendation to clarify existing safety and disease exemptions in the ordinance to specifically include fire safety, direct immediate implementation, and direct County Council to prepare procedural options for allowing tree removal for disease and safety and consideration of evidence needed for both applicants and department at the General Government Committee meeting. The department at this time believes that this is allowable under Chapter 10A-17, that folks can not only prune, but also specifically cut down trees in relationship to fire safety and disease-related issues so as to promote public safety. I don't know if County Council would like to add to this item.
If I may, Madam Chair. Yeah, so, and this was, I believe this one was discussed a bit at the board, and then there were some specific recommendations or proposals from the ad hoc committee that didn't get fully discussed at that time, that did get referred to the board. Just to remind the committee, at the board meeting, I had mentioned that this was something that we were already working on. It was going to be handled at the department level, but certainly we're happy to handle it at the committee instead. The primary issue here is not so much the question of whether or not trees can be removed. I think that's pretty clear from the ordinance that they can, unless it's a commercial species with certain provisos. However, the questions have been essentially the appropriate standards. I see from the recommendation put forward by the ad hoc, there are some features there that model what we've been working on, to the extent that in particular we're looking for some sort of affidavit process, or we've been working with the department on a potential affidavit process to essentially establish as a starting point where people are, establish compliance with the ordinance with respect to the issues of the tree removal. What is a little bit more complicated, and what I see a few points here that I think I may ask if we can have a little bit more time to address in detail. There were some provisions in there with respect to what was referred to as a burden shifting, which is odd for a permit process. Essentially what was, I think what I had mentioned before was that a big part of the issue is essentially when you have the affidavit, what are the appropriate standards for the departments to apply when they think that there may be something false in the affidavit, and what may be the appropriate standard, both to investigate and then once having investigated, what may be an appropriate standard to go ahead and deny based on what they have. I don't know that I could recommend the proposals from the ad hoc to essentially have a burden shift entirely onto the department to have clear and convincing evidence that the affidavit was either incorrect or potentially even perjurous. usually when we're in a permitting situation, it's the applicant that needs to be able to establish essentially that they are in compliance. What was discussed there was a potential of a heightened evidence standard, that essentially if the preponderance of the evidence would show that in fact the applicant is not entitled to a permit, but the evidence of the tree removal being improper was not clear and convincing, that the permit would have to issue. There's some potential concerns there that I'd like to be able to address the committee on a bit more briefly in terms of whether or not that would be complying with our mitigation measures and the CEQA requirements. It's also, frankly, it's just not a model that I'm aware of ever being used in a permit granting situation. Essentially a presumption that someone's entitled by virtue of having signed the form, as opposed to based on an evaluation of whatever evidence is in front of them. Unfortunately, our outside counsel that has been working on this is on vacation at the moment. And what I would like to do is ask if we could bring back a more complete proposal of what we've been working on at the next General Government Committee, and let the committee sort of wade into that maybe in a little bit more detail as its own separate item, if that would be acceptable to the committee.
Oh, I think thank you. Wow. I think that's appropriate, Director Jurdy, or
Yeah, that works for me.
committee
Thank
member Jurdy, whatever we are today. I understand that, our applicants obviously are concerned about this, and it has been quite some time that some of them have not had answers for this. I do think that scheduling it for December 12th is a step forward to, Council Curtis, will we see a draft document at that point on December 12th?
Yes, I believe we can have a draft ready for you on December 12th.
Okay.
And just to note, we would be publishing that obviously the Thursday before, try and give public some opportunity to review so that the comments could then be gone into in some more depth at that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, would you like me to continue forward with these items? Are we going to go through them and then go to public comment?
I think just in an efficiency of time, let's go ahead and finish going through the items, and then we'll go ahead and take public comment. Some questions may be answered.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, Council Curtis, did you have some?
Sorry, I was just going to ask, would it be possible for us to take just a brief break, maybe 10 minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, we will take a 10-minute pause, and we will come back at 3:10. Thank you. Director Nevedal, can you please proceed?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chair. So we have closed item 3 for the moment, and we'll be moving on to item 8. Item 8 in the ad hoc recommendations is to a recommendation to create a dispute resolution process for matters and decisions that do not result in denials. This is in alignment with the often discussed need for the MCD to do as much as possible to help the current cohort stay in the program and succeed to annual state licensure. So currently, the department does not have a dispute resolution program. However, folks do let us know their opinion about our reviews. And if a planner has a question about how to proceed with a review, that question would go essentially up the supervisor/management chain. Currently, or most recently, we did hire a extra help chief planner. So questions currently would go from the planner regarding any sort of disagreement about a matter that did not result in a denial to the chief planner and then potentially to myself for consideration. A dispute resolution process, the department does have concerns that creating a formal dispute resolution process would not only significantly slow reviews, but would create another or an additional mandate that's unfunded on department staff. So I'm at this time, I'm not sure what more to say about this item, and perhaps County Council has thoughts on item 8.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think I actually would find public comment on this one particularly helpful. I had a bit of trouble understanding what in particular this might be getting at. To the extent that there are concerns of potential inconsistencies within the department in terms of the application, there may be mechanisms to formalize whatever is the department head's review, but whether that was done and what way it might be done, I think would depend a lot on where people might be perceiving there to be issues or problems. I also couldn't tell. There was in some of the comments, and this is an item that'll be coming to the board tomorrow, which is the appeals process. In some of the comments on the appeals process, there were comments about essentially wanting to take away the director's authority to make decisions and give it to some other party. If the result here is, or if the intent with this was to have, certain decisions made by the director get overruled, I may have more concerns about that in terms of, is that really an efficient process, and is that a good mechanism, or is that something that might be appropriate for either the existing appeals or some other mechanism there.
Supervisor Jordy?
Thank you. So when I look at, say, a general plan, which is almost like a constitution, and then you look at the statutes, which are the ordinances, they're too broad really to cover everything. There's no way they can imagine every scenario. And so my understanding is that over the several decades, the planning department, which of course has been administering rules for the county for decades, that they've developed departmental memos. I believe that often a departmental memo would be maybe written by a chief planner, signed off by maybe the planning director at different times, and that those memos provide guidance to the planners on how, at a finer grain detail, how to implement policies that are found in the land use code, and but just aren't specified to that great a detail. And they're typically written because there's certain items that just sort of come up over and over again. So it's important for the department to have consistency in how they implement those rules. The cannabis department obviously is very new. The ordinance is new and ever changing. I'm curious, given its lack of history, has the cannabis department had the time to draft memos along the lines of the planning department memos?
We have started that process, but it is in no way complete at this point. So in order to prepare, for example, for the corrections portal, we drafted a 27-page guidance document for planners reviewing those portal submissions. So in a way to try to encourage consistency and ensure consistency. And we're currently working, now that we have a chief planner on board, in providing memos and guidance to the planners on all aspects of the review. But again, we are in no way complete with that work at this time.
So I'm just bringing this up because I'm curious if, when we hear public comment, if memos of this kind would help to address, of course, it could, some of the concerns may go beyond, what these memos can address.
I think for the department also, there, because new people are being hired all the time, there's also some training that hasn't been consistent. So there's real opportunities with the new chief planner, extra help chief planner that you've hired to really build some of that departmental workbook, if you will, so that can be a more transparent process. I do want to go ahead and take public comment or expression on this item. We have 2 more items to discuss today. So if you have comments about this item and its intention, not related to the appeals process, which will be heard tomorrow at the board, that would be great. So just a reminder, the request was to create a dispute resolution process for matters and decisions that do not result in denials. This is in alignment with the often discussed need for MCD to do as much as possible to help the current cohort stay in the program and succeed to annual state licensure. And again, I'm going to take public comment in the room first, and then I'll go online. And I see that Michael Katz has raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, Hannah Nelson again, thank you. And I just want to briefly circle back to the first item, which is going to be heard in December regarding number 3. And I want to, it's important to go back to that at this juncture in preparation for that. Number 1, it's extremely important that we remember that the vegetation modification process or whatever, this is not out of context. This is after 5.5 years, the 6th department head / manager in the 3rd department, and processes have changed. And so I think that it's important to note that it's not just about the evidentiary standards, but also inclusion of definitions such as, can dead trees be removed or not, or burnt trees that aren't completely, so it's a number of things. And I think that I just want to remind everybody, I think that everybody here has seen my clarification of tree removal prohibition in 10A17 document. So I think that while I certainly appreciate that that was just a starting point. It would be really helpful to address when we do at the next meeting the various components of that memo and any other issues that we've had the opportunity to discuss, for example, with the ad hoc and the stakeholders, including county council. And also, to the extent that there's any way to have a draft before the Thursday before, that would be so helpful on a technical item like that. It would be awesome. I understand it's difficult, but to the extent that is possible, excellent. With respect to this dispute resolution issue, it's not just about clarification and consistency for the planners. It's also about clarification of the standards and processes and application. As Supervisor Jurdy indicated, the PBS memos really are also released to the public. So we're talking about not just internal documents for training and whatnot, but pushing that information out to the public, so that everybody knows how it's being dealt with. The other thing is that it's really important, because this is all new with respect to those policies, to have an opportunity to have some interactive process where unanticipated items or the application in a particular instance is not what was envisioned by the development of the guidance documents comes up. And so whatever context that is, I think what the idea here behind the dispute resolution, short of and separate from the appeals, which is after denial, is in keeping with the direction that the board has indicated many times, that at least for a wide berth of applicants, the idea is to figure out how we work through them, given that they've hung in there for 5.5 years, and whatever the issues are, to try and resolve them. Some are clearly not going to be able to be resolved, and that's understandable, but to the extent that they can be, there needs to be some process. Until very recently, the poor director has had to do all of the decision-making, the building, the policies, and the application of them. And hopefully now that the department is being more fully built out, it will function in a little bit more normal process in terms of frontline workers have guidance from their department heads, and they are applying those things, and then it would go up in that chain of command, et cetera. But that's just not how it's been functioning. And so I think the issue was really raised given the need to figure out how do we make sure that the most people possible are able to, after so many changes, and remember, with every single change in department manager or director and department location, every process has wanted to put a different spin on what was required or what this means or whatever. So we got to look at it in this context. For those people regarding historical things, there needs to be some mechanism, an informal process that allows for that back and forth, separate from the appeals post-denial.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael? I see you. I said that I was going to go to in the room and then on Zoom and then back to in the room.
Oh, yes. This is Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. Thank you, supervisors, for having this conversation. I want to echo Hannah's statements on the vegetation modification and point 3, the real importance of addressing this, and especially prior to the implementation of an appeals program. So, if this is not something that is going to be discussed and kind of determined here in this chamber today, I think that it would still be essential for this committee to go back to the board and have that conversation so that it can be implemented as soon as possible. I also, want to point to something that was just discussed for the last agenda item. I definitely sincerely appreciate the expansiveness of this conversation. There were some great recommendations that were made in the previous meeting in the previous agenda item, but the only direction that came from it was reach out to GoBiz and to reach out to CDFW. So we are still uncertain as to if all of the questions that went unanswered about how funds will be distributed and those kind of workflow questions, many of the really insightful questions and considerations that Chantal provided, what is the plan for implementing those suggestions? It seemed like the program was just there was a couple of things, but then the rest was kind of just moved forward. And so I think the community would benefit from being able to identify if their input is being heard and considered and will be put into a revision of the draft. And if then we would be able to see that before it comes back to the board or before 4 days before it comes back to the board, which is another thing I want to echo related to the affidavit that County Council mentioned. Having 4 days over a weekend to dig into really complicated issues is not necessarily the best way to get the best response from the community and the most well thought out input, which should be the goal for all of these items. And so, we have, we can work out where some of these suggestions that are coming today could be considered. Maybe there is an opportunity to have another GGC meeting in November. Maybe there's some other way that stuff could be shared with the community for consideration before, just 4 days before the meetings. I think that would be very helpful. So those are the primary considerations, and I'll certainly have more comments on the other issues, the other points as we proceed. But thank you so much for your consideration, and I really look forward to seeing impact from the comments and having them be really considered and implemented as often as possible into these policies, and if not, an explanation as to why not, so we can continue a dialogue getting to something that works for both the regulators and the regulated community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. And as the chair of this committee, especially regarding the last agenda item, we did have a lengthy conversation and a back and forth today that was a little outside of standard operating procedures for government. I'm sorry that didn't meet your standards, but I think that the questions were answered. Perhaps we can ask the department to do a summary in Canon notes. Actually, I think that'll come out when the applications come out. There will be more of a summary. So thank you very much for those comments. And if we could go back into the room for public expression.
Susan Tibbin, thank you very much for this opportunity. Supervisor Jurdy, you mentioned, I think, perception. I think I heard that. Sometimes perception is more powerful than reality, unfortunately. And the perception on many of our parts, small operators, is that as hard as you're working, and you are working very, very hard, particularly our director, there seems to be no sense of urgency in terms of we really are just hanging on. Many of us have given up. And the most stark evidence of that is the for sale signs up and down Highway 101, let alone inland. The fact that almost a half of commercial properties are boarded up and empty in all of our small communities. You can't miss it. In terms of what we can do to change that perception, for many of us, we've dealt with multiple reviewers over years. There's been high staff turnover. It's certainly nobody's fault, but it causes a feeling of hopelessness. We, as small operators, deal with over 26 agencies. We hope that dealing with our local entities will be a little more friendly, a little easier. For instance, the planning department. We would like to see many of us who are legacy or longtime cultivators grandfathered in. If we look at building codes, if a building was built in 1910, there's certain kinds of codes. In 2022, those have changed drastically. But that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that older building other than health and safety. So we'd like to see you work with us with a little bit of an understanding of the sense of urgency. Many of us have been hanging on for years. If we look at a budget, sometimes the budget isn't even approved or considered until almost a year after we've submitted it. Prices have changed drastically. Contractors are no longer available. The weather has changed drastically, as it's continuing to do. So we're asking you to help us and look more closely at, sometimes the letter of the law needs to be in a different typeface. So thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments. I don't see any hands raised online, so we'll go to public expression in the room, and I have 2 people waiting to speak.
Thank you. Paul Hansberry. Dispute resolution, I think, might come down to, in more cases than not, of a common sense, a misunderstanding, someone putting something down and being misunderstood as the reviewer reads the thing, and the opportunity to meet with the person rather than get involved in a long back and forth email chain, to have a meeting and describe what the boots on the ground situation really is, which may have been not clearly expressed in the application, and resolving it that way with one-on-one with the planner of in-person meeting might go a long way, and in resolving the dispute that did not result in denial and an appeal. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Please come forward.
Hi, Corinne Powell again. I just wanted you, Supervisor Mulhern and Supervisor Jurdy, to understand that there are 5 of us in the room speaking for hundreds of people. And I, for one, am completely supportive of the information that Hannah Nelson brings to this process, and also the suggestions from MCA, as they took over a year to be resolved and consolidated with the former ad hoc. So please keep in mind that we, the community, are looking to understand what the GCC's perspective is on this process. We have no idea where this program is going to go, how it's going to evolve. We know that there are lots of log jams in multiple application processes, in the difficulties of rolling out the equity grants. I believe we were on version 6 of that manual, I'm not quite sure, but we're looking to you for leadership that helps the community. And in the last year and a half or so, we have seen more obstacles in application processes, more delays, more confusion, and I know that you have a big job on your shoulders to try and assist this very, very significant part of our economy. And when Susan Tibbins says that people are going out of business right and left, that is the truth. If you imagine how people involved in cannabis in Mendocino over the last, let's give it 6 years, as they have not been able to comply, and not necessarily for any egregious circumstances, but just because the regs are such that it is difficult. You see businesses closing because there's no support from the community for those businesses anymore. They don't have the money. So please, in general, I believe the community would like to hear from General Government Committee as to what you see as your role and how you believe that you can actually help turn things around to be more supportive of this industry. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised online, so in the room, please.
Hi again, my name's Chantal Simon Pietri. I have, I guess, a clarifying question to start. I'm zooming way out. I'm educated as a lawyer. I can be eloquent and definitely uneloquent at the same time. I think I'm intelligent, but I'm really confused as to what the purpose of the public comment is. Why do we spend the time writing what we write, coming here and speaking about it and talking to you, making eye contact with each of you, who I know you guys do fantastic jobs and you work super hard. I have a lot of respect for the positions that you carry, for the length of time that you've been there, the transitions that have resulted in you being where you are. But I feel slightly misled that we went through years of working with the Board of Supervisors, the creation of the ad hoc, going through the process of getting to where the ad hoc made specific, discrete, doable solutions according to different agenda items that they had. Those were then brought back to the board. The board chose to not universally not take them up. There was some accommodation of the particular ones, but the majority of them were brought back here to this group. And I've really appreciated meeting with you, Supervisor Mulhern, one-on-one. We've met now twice and had lengthy conversations about some of these issues. I'm really, as somebody who's educated, has lived in the county for 20 years, who works in environmental compliance and policy, I've worked as a lobbyist, I'm confused, what is the effort that's coming from our government to have us engage in a way that is meaningful, where our commentary is actually considered and implemented? It feels like we spend a lot of time, and I generally leave with a feeling of despair. Like if me, as an educated person who's, I have a grounded home, I raise a son in the community, I work professionally here, I'm not a cultivator, how do the people that don't have the agency that I do participate in this process in a meaningful way? If those of us with agency, such as a bar certified attorney are right here, and MCA, where they're making regular comments in a diplomatically based program, bringing those recommendations forward, where I feel like there's just not accountability between our voices and those of the government that are in front of us. And my comment is, it's not like, I don't mean it to be so charged, but really mean it to be like, how do we do this better? How do we evolve this democratic process so it's truly engaging those that are all involved? And I understand in the realms of government, there is rulemaking and legal opinion that needs to happen. There's procedure and policy. There has to be deference to department director to be able to do her job autonomously at some point. But we're in a program that is retroactively permitting a historic legacy illegal agriculture activity in all of the industry associated with it. That is something that is unique. We're trying to do it for the first time in this state and in a jurisdiction where it's a predominant form of the illegal economy here. And it still seems to be, we're trying to fit like a square peg into a round hole by going through old procedural processes that don't take into account the historical legacy of the voices that have been doing this work that our economy is now based upon. Thanks for letting me speak over again about that. I'll speak particularly to now just the dispute resolution process. In my experience working with cultivators, I have had, I've said this in other board meetings, right now I have about, I think about 65 active Mendocino County, either permittees or applicant clients that I assist with their environmental compliance processes, and many of them that I've worked with for over 5 years, since the very beginning of the 10A17 rulemaking process. And of those, about 50 folks have signed up for me to write their CEQA documents. About a year ago, I contracted with them. Of that 50, I have 35 remaining that are going to remain in business. There's been an attrition of 15 of my pool of people that are very well supported cultivators in the permitting and application process. They're not folks that have been doing it all on their own, or if they've done a majority of it on their own, they're hiring a consultant come in and do CEQA. And over the last year, it's been the final death blows have happened where they're not staying in business anymore. They have sold their properties, or just walked away, and going to deal with all of the ripple effect to their financial stability of just walking away from their property. That's all for now. Thanks.
Thank you. So the item that we were discussing was number 8, create a dispute resolution process for matters and decisions that do not result in denials. And I know that County Council was seeking perhaps more information from the public about what the intention of that was. We heard from the department that there are now more staff to be able to help elevate applications that have questions or concerns, essentially beyond the planner level and before the director level. So County Council, did you have additional questions or comments on this one?
If I may, Madam Chair, I actually was just sort of hoping maybe to address one of the points that was raised in one of the last comments there, which was in terms of how the engagement and how the public comment can be useful. And I would just say and I don't want to speak for everyone, because I think the board and the department may have their own areas that they focus on. For me, what is really useful in the context of public comment is understanding what the specific issue is about, understanding what a proposal might look like in terms of what the solutions are, and understanding some of the building blocks that go into it. The sort of the more specific, some of the details in terms of what sorts of problems have been popped up or perceived, what are the thoughts as to what avenues might be out there. Those are the areas that I do find most useful. And I think in this particular case, we've heard from Ms. Nelson and Mr. Hansberry that a lot of this may have to do with lack of, or a miscommunication or a concern that essentially the department's determination that it's making might be different if the department had more information or if there was a better opportunity for information to be provided. And I don't want to step on Ms. Nevedal's toes, because I do think that there are some steps that have been addressed with respect to that. On that front, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend a particularly formal procedure, but it may be appropriate to have some sort of mechanism to be encouraging those dialogues rather than something, for example, that might look like the appeal process being implemented pre-denial.
Thank you. Director Nevedal, could you address that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So, I do agree that having additional staff, especially management, right? This is the first time we've had management for planning staff. And while it's extra help and part-time, it will take a heck of a lot of application review burden off of myself as the director. And I think is a perfect arena for questions to move from a planner about a review up to management, and then have management step in to offer assistance with resolving the questions and or help to conduct outreach to the applicant to try to seek that additional information, as Council Curtis had mentioned. I do want to just make a note going back on how we notify the public about policy changes and the input involved around that, because I do also want to acknowledge that we have been kind of in this rapid policy development management process so that we can move forward with the issuance of permits. So we have conducted policy modifications and changes, such as introducing a modification application and policy to go along with that. We've updated our renewal policy. We've created and then also amended the contiguous expansion affidavit policy. And I just want to point out that while we don't have formal policy documents available on our website, there is an updated webpage for each and every one of those policies, and they were also discussed a minimum of one time, including feedback opportunities for the public, in an MCD update meeting. Same holds true for vegetation modification. We did not create a vegetation modification page, but we did hold at least 2 meetings discussing vegetation modification where we took input and had discussion with the public. Now, could we have more robust discussion? Could we hold more public meetings? The answer is probably yes to that. However, they are an unfunded mandate. So while we started with weekly meetings and then moved to every other week for update meetings, we're now at about a monthly meeting, and I think it's about what we can manage as we really try to meet these state deadlines. So we are more than happy to move into a more formal policy memo, which might assist with some of these questions around dispute resolution. But we do, before we change anything and move forward with a new policy and putting that into action, we do notify the public through our public meeting process. And it's easy to figure out when a public meeting is occurring if folks would be so kind as to sign up for CannaNotes, which is the county's cannabis version of the e-notification system. And also check our website, because we do have a 2022 events page where we notice all meetings.
Thank you for that. I think that this is one of the cases where because the department is so new, they are certainly, and I think I heard that during public comment, and I hear that often from cultivators. They've been at this since 2015. So a lot of the challenges come from many years of being switched in between departments and in between directors. And I know that you and your team have been trying to build the documentation and support the community and hear their concerns. I think another challenge with government that we often have is communication, and sometimes the requests are not able to be accommodated, and that can certainly be challenging when the requests cannot be accommodated. But perhaps in your next MCD report, if it could include a a matrix or a workflow for applicants to understand where they are in the process. And I know this is a little bit challenging because applicants are at all different levels, but if, for instance, if I was a brand new applicant, here's what my process looks like, and sort of make that a public document so that people understand the expectations. That is challenging for somebody that's been doing it since 2015, right? It's not the same timeline, obviously, but I think if we can provide some type of documentation, and that might not be in your next MCD update. Maybe that's at the December 12th meeting. If that could possibly be an agenda item, and I see that Supervisor Jardy has his hand up. Is that a reasonable request, or do you guys not have time for some type of workflow chart?
I think that I would probably request some additional guidance on creating such a chart. So, for example, we have a multitude of application statuses, right? And so we could perhaps create a workflow to help folks understand the timeline or the process by which we'll be conducting final review of the various statuses. I don't know if that's kind of meets the mark of what you're suggesting. Renewals are a whole nother challenge upon themselves because the permits that were issued, the vast majority of those permits issued do not have environmental review or have not had environmental review conducted. And some folks have expanded beyond what's allowable for their property or their parcel, and or have moved into areas that for one reason or another are not allowable, such as the streamside management area or an area where vegetation modification has occurred. So would kind of a general matrix of how statuses, various statuses will move forward be acceptable?
I think that that would be helpful for the community to understand, but I also think that just a blank slate of I'm a new applicant, this is what my process looks like. If I get denied, then this is who this is, you know, where I'm going to go talk to somebody. Not if I get denied, if there's questions about my application, the planner doesn't understand, then this is, you know, like the process that I go through. Something more along the lines of that, related to, you know, not a denial, but maybe there's more information that's needed. And I want to let Supervisor Jardy see if he has any comments or questions on this one.
Yeah, so on this particular point, if we have the track it system, I guess I was under the impression that members of the public could see where it's the status of their permit with planning or building, and I would think cannabis, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not publicly visible.
So at some time before I became an employee of the county, the AG numbers that are visible in Trackit were removed from public access. So while the public can see building permits and some notes about the status of building permits, the public does not have access to see AG numbers in the public-facing portion of the Trackit portal.
Well, if the applicant is the applicant of the building permit, they would know their own building permit number, right? So does that mean that they could track it through the Track It software?
They can track the building permit, but not the cannabis cultivation permit or a cannabis cultivation application itself, which I referenced as an AG number. All of our application and permits start with AG _ the year of the application dash and unique identifier for each applicant.
Okay, well, maybe this is something for additional public comment, but I'm just curious if there would be a way so that applicants could track their own applications. And just a couple other, go ahead.
I do believe that that's a feature that would be more available through Acela. We are hoping to transition from Trackit to a different platform for tracking all cannabis-related applications and permits. That platform would be called Acela, and that platform does have an internal dashboard that the applicants can use to not only see the status of their review, but also manage any deficiencies or additional material notices that have come from the department.
Okay, thanks.
What was the timeline
I think
for
Paul
Acela?
Hansberry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Supervisor Jody.
Okay, I think Paul Hansberry suggested that there would be a process in addition to email correspondence for people to have I guess a phone conversation or in-person conversation. I realize there's pros and cons of email with the written correspondence, and because you could document the correspondence versus in-person or phone conversations, but there are also some advantages with phone conversation that you have more back and forth. So how does the department try to balance that out?
Well, we have had a number of not in-person meetings because we currently have no location for that, but when we get to Willits Justice Center. So we have had a number of Zoom meetings with applicants regarding their application materials, especially when the email correspondence has failed to articulate the message the department is trying to express to the applicant. Site plans are a great example, right? Trying to email back and forth about what's needed on a site plan can sometimes be incredibly confusing, right? Where say, well, we see your north arrow on the site plan, but the gardens don't seem to be orientated correctly based on north, south, east, west. And so in one instance, we just sat down and had a meeting. I showed the PBS1 map. I showed the site plan. I'm like, look, the garden's this way on one page, this way on the other page, and this way on PBS1, right? So we are not opposed to having those meetings, but also I think there needs to be some consideration about time. The fees associated with applications that have not been issued, they have all been digested or expended by the department or the county in their actions over the course of the last 5 years. So I think it really needs to be on a case-by-case basis where communications have broken down.
Okay, and then just a final comment was there was a comment that some of the several of the items proposed by the ad hoc committee were not considered by the board. Well, just to clarify, we took up the ad hoc committee's agenda. I think it was around 4 in the afternoon, maybe 3:30 or 3 o'clock. And by the time we got to 6 o'clock, we still had not made it through all of their items. And I asked the ad hoc committee if they could direct us to the most time sensitive items and we would deal with those, and that the others that weren't as time sensitive would go to the general government committee. So that's why certain items were addressed at the board meeting initially and others were directed over here to the general government committee. So we're attempting to go through and give good consideration to every item. It's just that, we're not necessarily going to be meeting till midnight at a board of supervisors meeting if the discussion is prolonged.
Thank you, Supervisor Jody. I do see that Blair's hand was raised online for item number 8 regarding alternative dispute resolutions. We did hear the director say that there are options. And that the department is working to improve the processes to make that more transparent to the community. So Blair, did you have additional questions about number 8?
I think that that sounds great. That was what I think we were wanting to hear, is that it just needs to be more of an understandable formal process as opposed to just so that we know what the process is, as opposed to just something that is internal that us, the public, and applicants have to guess. That would be that would be available. So if that can be more formally created, that would be great.
Thank you. So Director Nevedal, do you think that you could bring an agenda item back to the GGC for December 12th or at our first meeting in January of 2023?
I think we could, but I think if we're looking for a formal where every single applicant has an opportunity to meet with a planner at least once in person, we would be looking to assess a fee to that item.
Okay, I think if that's the case, then when we hear the item, we could find out what that fee might look like, and then that could be part of the agenda item. If this is a process that the community wants to see, then this is the fee that will have to be associated with that. So I would like to move on to item number 11, as it is almost 4 p.m. Align the county definition of outdoor cultivation with the imminent and expected state change in its definition to include the use of light deprivation without the use of light assistance. I believe Director Nevedal, you already have an answer to this question. Could you please go ahead?
Yes, based on review of the outdoor definition, we do not believe that a change to the ordinance is necessary, and that if and when, right, the state decides to allow for light deprivation activities to be allowed under outdoor license types, the department would be more than happy to put forward a clarifying memo so that applicants understand how to align their state licensure with their local permit. Additionally, that memo would provide guidance to our staff, so they would be understanding of what type of state license might be applicable.
Thank you. Supervisor Jurdy, did you have any questions or comments on that item? Okay, I will open it up to public comment, but given the fact that the director stated that it's not going to be a policy issue and that it will be a memo that goes out, I'm just looking for hands on Zoom or public comment on number 11. Okay. Okay, in the room, please.
All right, one very brief question, and that is that I just want to make sure that County Council agrees that the definitions in 10A17 as they exist, if the state implements this change in definition at the state level, would work, and if that's the case, fabulous.
I'm happy to work with the department to verify that. I think what we're talking about is a situation where a state might treat something as one license type, but the county would treat it as a different one, which wouldn't prevent someone from going forward, might cause a little bit of confusion, but also maybe a workable regulatory scheme.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just double check the Zoom. Okay, we didn't miss anybody. So item number 12, direct MCD staff to work with CDFW and stakeholders to review and modify a screening tool for sensitive species and habitat review referrals. Director Nevedal, do you want to start off this item?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have not conducted a heck of a lot of sensitive species habitat referrals. We currently have 124 files in the system that we work with, that we utilize, the platform that we utilize to send referrals back and forth to CDFW. I want to say that a number of those referrals are, the 124 number is duplicative in the sense that every correspondence back and forth, so to speak, is a number count, right? So I did not have the ability to go in and like open every 124 folder in there to see exactly how many persons or AG numbers that represents, but there are a number that are duplicative. So at this time, I do not believe that we have enough data to identify if there are components that actually need streamlining or that the public, the applicants, would benefit from by streamlining. And I have some significant concerns that going back to CDFW to recraft or modify the screening tool would be incredibly time consumptive. It would take a heck of a lot of time. I think probably 6 to 9 months. And I also feel like if we're going to open up the document, the screening tool, to revamp it, we probably should not be doing referrals while the document, or even reviews while that document is open. So I have incredible concerns that taking such a step to recraft the screening tool would put us in jeopardy of meeting state guidelines for folks to be eligible for their renewal. It's probably important to note here that the sensitive species habitat review must be completed before an Appendix G checklist can be drafted. It is a component of our performance standards that must be the results of which must be included in that Appendix G checklist. So reopening the screening tool not only stops our ability, so to speak, to conduct those reviews and those referrals, it also puts the brakes on applicants' ability to craft their Appendix G checklist, which, again, we're not that far out from our deadline of having to have folks have complete CEQA documents by July 1st of 2023 in order to be eligible for that next renewal. And I really don't want to do anything that would jeopardize it. And again, I don't believe we have enough data to understand if there are components of that screening tool that are actually posing a burden or creating unnecessary referrals at this time.
Supervisor Jardy?
Yeah, Director Neville, so I'm hearing from you, at least I think I'm hearing that you have some concerns that there'd be unintended consequences of item number 12. But, this committee is responding to a memo prepared by 2 supervisors who were the cannabis ad hoc. And, so I obviously didn't attend those meetings. I'm just, seeing what they wrote, and in their memo, they're saying that this was agreed upon at the July 28th Cannabis Ad Hoc Committee meeting. So I guess my question is there new information that you've learned, or just analysis that you've conducted since that July 28th meeting? Or were they misunderstanding what the agreement was at that meeting?
During that meeting, we agreed to have a follow-up discussion about this item. I do not believe we agreed to rewrite the screening tool. However, we did agree to have follow-up conversation about it. And I did reach out to County Council after that meeting and check in about kind of the process, frankly, about rewriting the screening tool. The timeline for development of the initial screening tool was lengthy. I believe County Council told me it took roughly 18 months to develop the initial screening tool. Now, going back and revamping it is going to be a several months long project, and I don't know how we would shorten that. And so, yeah, I do have concerns that have come up since that original meeting.
County Council?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would concur that I do think it's probably going to be at least a couple of months if you were to undertake this process, and you would be looking at delays in the permits during that time. So this is fundamentally a policy question and a cost-benefit analysis. So I think you have to weigh what are the benefits that you might get from modifying the tool versus what's the cost of the delay and the extra resources that would go into that at this juncture.
Thank you. I think that this is one of the most important reasons for the GGC to be having these meetings, so that the board and the community can understand the needs of the cannabis cultivators and the intentions of some of these recommendations. So I do have online Michael Katz and Blair Auclair, and I'll also take comment from the room. So let me go to Zoom first, and then back to the room, and then back to Zoom. So Michael, if you could please unmute and begin your public comment. Thank you.
If Hannah's in the room and wants to speak, I think it might be better for her to speak first.
She's passing to Chantel. So if you guys want to just get in a line, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for working with us in the informal nature. I'm not Michael Katz or Hannah Nelson. Again, I'm really hopeful that there's a little bit of dialogue. So bear with me if I ask some questions, but then I talk through your answering space. But I do find it's really interesting to ask a question and then we get an answer, but it's a totally different question. So I'm definitely learning how to participate in this in a way that results in the result, that obtains the result that I'm going for. And again, like with smiles and good energy between us. Thanks for being here and working through these things with us. I'm committed to continuing in the process, even if it's really frustrating at times. So again, I've worked as an environmental consultant. I work very closely with DFW. I've filed probably about 150 lake and streambed alteration agreements, and work closely over many years with Angela Liebenberg from DFW, who is involved in developing the screening tool and the performance standards and what's known as Exhibit A. And Kristen, thank you so much for the really in-depth weekly meetings when we did go into the SSHR screening tool to really understand, for some of us that manage multiple clients, to understand what triggers somebody going from here to there, why did they go to there, and then how can we give information back to our clients to say, this is why you're going that direction, and these are the boundaries within which the planning staff of the department can go, and also within which DFW can go. My point on this is in no way a recommendation that it be a wholesale rewrite of the screening tool, but it is just simply to look at, I think there's a few steps along the way with where the department is choosing to refer that could be looked at more closely. And I think that's where sort of a technical advisory committee or more of a conversation, Ms. Mulheron, in the GGC would be the right forum with this technical group to have the back and forth to say, hey, these are the situations we see that are a clear yes, must be referred. We know what those are. There's really clear environmental law that says that these ones need to go through the technical review that DFW trained biologists, hydrologists, and really sometimes of their permitting review staff need to look at, are the impacts significant or less than significant? My conversation with Angela over time has been, I think I've had 6 referred to DFW, and I've received back project referral comments on 3 of them so far. The other 3 I know were referred, but I haven't yet received back the project referral comments. So PRCs is what I call those. Of the 3 that have come back, none of them have been ever recommended for like what I would call like the denial, or their, the threshold of their impact is above the level of what the MND was seeking to cover. So it seems like there's it's wise to have the referral process. I think when our county staff doesn't have the technical expertise that is necessary to make the decisions in some situations as to whether or not there will be a less than significant impact or not. But maybe it's over the period of time that additional staff have been trained and brought up to speed with how the whole story fits together of the performance standards and the continuous expansion affidavit, that now perhaps with a re-looking at, I would look at the entire document, but I think we would rule out really quickly. Some of them do not require a re-examination, and some other ones, there's a nuance to, perhaps there's a second level of department review prior to referral on some very specific ones that are not so technical to require DFW. I'm kind of going in a circle. I don't want to repeat myself on it. So my main point on that is it's not a rewrite. I totally agree we don't have the time to go back in and go through the whole thing again. That would be really, really uncomfortable for everybody. But if we could just go in and look at where could we improve it, I think there's some clear areas that could be. And I think there's a lot of technical consultants that could give you really feedback to say, hey, this is one that doesn't need to get referred. Here's from a biologist. Here's from a hydrologist. I don't remember the performance standards right now off the top of my head to give you the exact specifics. And I want to speak back to you, Deputy Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, got it, thanks, that in my experience of giving public comment, I totally agree it's much more constructive for us to come in with really specific, like legally written language, but it's a whole lot of a waste of time if it's not going to be considered. And for me as a professional and a parent, when I look at how much time I can fit in to work on policy, it's around the edges of everything that I do. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time creating a legal memo. I'm not a hired lobbyist. I'm a volunteer. So it's not at all worth my time to give that level of constructive, specific commentary. What else would I say on it? I also would say that I think it deserves a revisit given the changes and evolution in, oh, I got your name wrong, I'm so sorry. I think it deserves a revisit as far as now that the DFW has gone through the period of recontracting to look at, okay, now we're going forward with an existing contract, there's a dollar amount that went, if that's true, are we ready to look at how that tool has been working? If the overall intention is efficiency and speed of processing, that referral to DFW does not fit in the efficient path. But it is definitely necessary in certain situations, but it does not fit in the efficient path. Thanks.
Madam Chair, is it all right if I ask a question or two of this speaker?
You can get my name wrong too.
It is all right. I do see Supervisor Jaridy's hand up, so I wanted to acknowledge that. And I did want to just let the director be able to take in all of this information and public comment before she responds. So if you had questions, County Counsel Curtis, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure that I understand the commentary correctly. And I think what I'm hearing is that there's possibly an over-referral of items that CDFW might not are thinking are particularly significant. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
And do you know to what extent some of that is coming in through as a result of guidelines that have been sort of jointly adopted and approved to the county and CDFW versus to what degree they might be, from informal standards that are internal to the department?
That's a challenging question to answer on the spot. I would kind of say a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think there's definitely a default to over-referral from my assessment, and there's also places where the performance standards are not accurate with current environmental law, and so therefore there's some discrepancy, and there's things that are being referred that are automatically covered by existing water board policy and doesn't need to be an issue for referral. Okay. Particularly setbacks from certain types of water bodies is one of those.
Thank you. Is this the sort of thing where you or someone, and I'm not putting you on the spot a little bit, might be able to provide a little bit more detail as to some of the specific standards that might be at issue?
I think that's already been done multiple times, and yes, we could do it again. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Supervisor, did you have a question for the speaker?
I did. So I've heard a similar commentary over the years relating to the coastal zone and development there. And I think it's related to both the county's standards for hydrological studies, the fact that we don't have a hydrologist on staff with the county. And I believe we've also heard the same commentary, maybe countywide, but specifically in the coastal zone relating to some other issues related to botanical studies or botanists, not having them on staff at the county. Could the speaker kind of clarify what would be the, the job description or the job title, the expertise needed that is very unlikely to be, either in the planning department or in the cannabis department that is in need?
Again, Supervisor Jody, that's a challenging question to offer a response to, like, in a constructive way. I have two parts to it. I'm going to give my best. The first off would be somebody that can understand stream classification, delineation, and setback demarcation. And there's a different methodology for that, and aligning the county methodology with what the State Water Resources Control Board's Cannabis General Order uses for their default mechanism for stream classification and then required setback from that. That's a long, technical answer. There's years of policy in that, but those who understand and they can understand where I'm going with it. I can hear my phone ringing in the background. It's my child calling, whatever. The second, sorry, my son's waiting for me to pick him up outside. Can you ask your second question again, Supervisor Jody? There were two parts of it that I was...
You don't have to answer it here, but I'm just trying to get an understanding of where the technical expertise is very likely lacking in either the county planning department or the cannabis department that could be leading to referrals. And so trying to understand what's that staff capacity that we don't have at the county and what is that where's the gap we're trying to fill?
Sure. I appreciate where you're going. I don't know if it's my place to recommend what exact technical staff is needed to be brought into the department, but I would say that perhaps looking back at the policy as to why we have the referral to CDFW and how it connects back to the M&D, and that there being an over-referral out of a legally protective position for the county to continue forward implementing 10A17. I think that's the background for it, not the lack of there being technical staff.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to in the room and then to Michael Katz and Blair O'Clair online.
Hi, Hannah Nelson again. And just to address a couple of those issues, I think we have provided, both Chantal and I, because we have a similar perspective in terms of there are specific items that were overbroad in the screening tool. And with CDFW, Angela Liebenberg, we all discussed a few of those items, and she agreed that we could definitely easily amend, discuss, and then decide that you all decide whether some amendments could be made. And that was back in July, and the specific points were submitted before then and understood. And I think the real main areas have to do with the setbacks and then the proper date that's being used that is currently January 1st, 2016, which is the proof of prior date, and it really should be the MND date, which is later. And so it was really technical specific things that we were trying to problem solve of, because I think that we agree it would not be worth renegotiating the entire policy at this point. That's not what we were trying to do. We're just trying to say, okay, it takes a long time to get through this other process. How can is there anything with still being responsible that we could trim out of the screening tool without throwing out any of the protective guidelines? And that's what we came up and that's what we recommended, and then suggested that we work with DFW to do that. And that's what was agreed upon. And now it's months later and nobody wants to delay anything. We were just hoping to hone in on some specifics. I also really do want to address this issue about the specific recommendations. And this is really a good example, because I don't charge anybody for any of the time that I spend doing policy work. And you all know, you're sick of me, you see me do a lot. And I produce a lot of materials. And I put in that effort specifically with the understanding that it might be helpful to have something in black and white. And when it has been submitted repeatedly and then it's just kind of disappears, there's not a big motivation for me to take time out of all of the other things that I'm doing to do more of that. So for example, with the dispute resolution, also there's a certain acknowledgement of we're not set on something specific. It is the conceptual idea sometimes. Sometimes they're specific, and I produce materials just as an outline so that it can be responded to. So I appreciate that what's helpful, but it's also helpful on the other end to receive an idea or something on paper, and certainly have more than 2 days over a weekend to be able to think about it and see, gee, are there practical considerations or legal whatever it is. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm very committed, and I have been for many years, in trying to be productive and produce materials that could help. So I hope that that's recognized and that we can continue in that vein all the way around. Thank you very much. Oh, and number 9 was skipped, sorry.
Okay, we will go back to that. I will go to the online commenters, and I just wanted to add, I think the barrier in communication is that we could really do some more work of putting things in writing. We discuss at the board meetings the agenda items. We very often discuss the memos that are received, and discuss why or why not some of those recommendations could be followed, but because perhaps there isn't exactly a response in writing, it seems as though they are unheard, although they are heard and discussed during the meeting. So I think that's one of our communication barriers that hopefully we can work with the department and the stakeholders to overcome. I'm going to go to Michael Katz and then Blair O'Clair online if you had anything to add on this agenda item.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Mulhern. Supervisor Jurdy, this is Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. Yeah, the comment that I wanted to make was related to your last statement, Supervisor Mulhern. There are definitely times, and we've heard this for sure, that there are things that get sent in and discussed. But maybe they're not discussed at the dais, or maybe, they're discussed somehow and then they're identified as not workable, and then the world moves on, but there hasn't always been the communication back to the community about the conversations that led to that. But just, I want to really, like, for the record and for everyone here, with nothing but respect, show that just now, as we're discussing this item, when County Council asked for the specific language to be sent, I could certainly find the 4 or 5 times probably where these things have been shared. And so understanding that those communications may be happening, it is also clear that some of what is being submitted that is basically expert advice, for lack of a better term. Hannah is a 30-year expert attorney who successfully litigated the first case for the federal government to have to return medical cannabis to a patient. So, like, she really knows what she's talking about. And for her to provide dozens and dozens of pages of specific language recommendations that are then either ignored or pretended that they've been seen, or then asked for repeatedly and not actually absorbed and integrated, is the county is losing money by not utilizing this free resource and instead hiring outside counsels to come up with things that are already established law. And so I just really encourage this committee to go beyond what has happened to this point and to really, really dig into the specific recommendations being made by the stakeholder community, because within them are solutions for these problems. We are not trying to cause more problems. We are acknowledging the reality of the regulatory needs with the reality of the stakeholder needs. And we really hope that this committee will be a forum in which those can sincerely be addressed, discussed, and then implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Michael. And I do agree. One of the challenges that we've had in the past is that the ad hoc had referrals, and they may or may not have come back to the full board. With the intention of the GGC having these very transparent public forums, there's not an opportunity for those specific recommendations to be missed. It's a conversation that this is why we have moved to this forum. This is why we are having public meetings with county council in the room, so that these things can be discussed, and hopefully we can work towards creating a stronger permitting program. Blair, did you have a comment?
Hi, yes, I'll be brief.
Blair, I'm afraid you're losing your audio and we're catching about every other word. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Is that any better?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Oh, that's better? Okay. I just wanted to say that I believe that the argument is simple, the SSHR screening tool, that even though the initial creation that simple changes in the language couldn't be done quite quickly. And the one very simple example that I see from the MCA memo is that in the screening tool, it uses, quote, no impact instead of, quote, less than significant impact, which is the language that's in the MD. So it seems that just making a simple change like that and potentially having a conversation with CDFW, we want to make these really simple changes. Can we agree to that deadline to go back?
Blair, I'm afraid that your audio is really cutting out, but I did hear you provide a specific example, so thank you for that. And I think that that's the kind of communication we've been talking about today. If you want to try one more time, that's okay. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and let the director respond. Sorry, Blair, we're only really catching about every other word. So we'll go ahead and let the director respond.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all the public comments. So I will acknowledge that we have had concerns expressed about the SMAs outlined, or the streamside management areas outlined in the Exhibit A tool. Also, the reference to Oak Woodlands and the date for existing cultivation. And I did make a note of Ms. LeClaire's suggestion to consider changing no impact to less than significant impact. So I do have those notes. I do also think that there could potentially have been over-referral that has happened from staff. And I think this really is not so much an issue with the screening tool itself. It's an issue with training and consistency in review and how staff conducts the review in relationship to that screening tool. And while I'm not excited to talk about the lack of training that may have occurred, I think it's a reality that we have to acknowledge because of the timing of the screening tool coming on board. So when I look back at the contract that will be before the board tomorrow on consent, that contract starts in February of 2021, which is when the screening tool first started being used. And at that time, the program was either with exiting leadership or without leadership. It had recently been moved to Planning and Building Services. And it also was in a state of flux as far as the board and county council and planning and building were working diligently on a new ordinance. Based on conversations with current staff that was here when the screening tool was implemented, it's unfortunate that there was not robust training included in the implementation of that screening tool, and we are working diligently to provide robust training for the use of the screening tool, which I really do believe will resolve many of the issues we've heard from applicants, if not all of them, and from consultants or agents that we've heard today. In relationship to the streamside management areas and the request for the department to potentially be able to address stream classification, I don't necessarily think that that's the role of the department. We would have to train our each of our planners to identify riparian management areas, which are often identified based on fauna or flora, my apologies, flora found within proximity to that waterway. And if we were to adjust the screening tool to highlight the different types of streamside classifications and their according or the management area that's associated with each, we would also have to update the site plan guidance document to ensure that applicants are noting the classification of their stream and putting those stream side management buffers on their site plan. So it's not something that is solely within just the screening tool, right? It could have impacts on other application materials to ensure that as we adjust the screening tool, we have the information provided up front to actually manage the kind of broadening scope perhaps of the screening tool. But again, I really do think that these issues as expressed today could be managed through training, which we're hoping to do. We have training seminars scheduled for our staff the first 2 weeks in November, and this is one of the priority items.
Thank you. So I'll go back to Supervisor Jardy Would you like to see maybe an update of this item to come back to General Government Committee, perhaps in January after the training with staff has been implemented, and there's been an opportunity to work through some of the conversations about the screening tool and what is or is not working, might give staff some time to work through after they've been trained, to work through some examples and then bring an item back to the GGC? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that sounds like a good suggestion, a good time frame.
Does that work for the department?
Yes, that works for us. Thank you.
Okay, I think in that way we can have some time to have the conversation within the department, let the training happen, and perhaps if interested stakeholders that are so inclined would like to re-provide some of their discussion points, that could be a part of the training conversation, so that when training happens, there's a conversation about why or why not some of those things might happen. Okay. So I have a question. We are at 4:30. So I'm looking, there was a comment from the public about not having item number 9, issue local renewal permits within 30 days if they have minor changes that are below the established threshold that requires a modification of application as intended by 10A17 or state regulations. I honestly do not recall if we discussed that at the board meeting. Okay, Director Nevedal, if you could remind us what the discussion was. Thank you.
So this was discussed at the October 4th board meeting, and while it may have been included in the draft meeting minutes, Supervisor Haschak did ask that it be discussed before we left on October 4th. So it was thoroughly discussed. The department, there was no directive provided, and the department did provide some or express concerns regarding the item. As I mentioned a little bit earlier in this meeting, the vast majority of permits that were issued without environmental review having been conducted. That does include sensitive species habitat review and air quality management district referral. There's really no way for us to issue renewals within 30 days when the environmental review has not been completed. In doing so, we would have to forego, again, those environmental reviews, which I believe, again, would put some strain on significant strain on our ability to ensure that applicants are eligible for renewals on and after that July 1st, 2023 deadline, where we see elevated environmental requirements to get through the renewal of a provisional license. Now, as we move forward with Acela, and I apologize because I think Supervisor Jardy had asked about the timeline for Acela, so I apologize for not answering that question earlier, but I'll talk about the timeline now. We are hoping that we will be bringing the Acela contract back before the board in November, during the second meeting in November. That is what we're shooting for currently. In Acela, so a lot of the comments from the public do state that the DCC is moving forward with renewals and that they're almost seamless and automated. And that largely has to do with the Acela platform. And I do believe that once the issued permits have had all of their environmental reviews conducted and we have Acela in place, that this will also be the reality for our applicants here in Mendocino County. So the intention is to kind of preload renewal questions into the Acela platform that will allow the technology platform to determine whether or not the renewal has changes that would trigger a modification. And if the renewal application does not have changes that would trigger a modification, what our staff would be doing upon receiving is just making sure that the documents uploaded are truly what the upload says it is. And then it would make for a very seamless and almost instantaneous renewal, right? The applicant will come through Acela, they'll provide all their documents, they'll pay for the renewal, we'll get a notification, we can do a simple verification that we have all the materials we need to go ahead and move that renewal forward to issuance. Unless, of course, a modification is identified, then we would have to deal with the modification before the renewal. But again, I do believe once all environmental review is conducted, this will be a reality that renewals should take no more than 30 days.
Thank you. I think a lot of applicants will be relieved to hear that. I think this is, again, one of those things where the lack of communication has just been really challenging for applicants as they're trying to figure out where they are in the process. And it sounds like Acela is going to help with that. Will there be a public workshop or Zoom meeting about Acela? Like, this is what Acela will do for you, kind of FAQ to help the community understand the changes that are coming?
Absolutely. So we'll be having a series of internal trainings so we know how to use Acela. And then also, per the contract, there will be guidance provided to the public. So not only will there be guidance provided, I can't imagine that we wouldn't move forward with having at least one public meeting to walk through the Acela platform and what it looks like. I mean, I would like to do that, and we've done a heck of a lot of public meetings, so it would be in alignment with what we've already been offering the public, and I think it would just be very helpful. All of our public meetings are streamed and then recorded to YouTube with closed captioning, and then we post those videos right back to our website on the 2022 events page. So that's definitely part of our plan.
Yeah, I appreciate the meetings very much, because they're an opportunity for me to really try to understand what the constituent concerns are and whether or not they've been addressed. So I realize that not everybody is into watching a lot of meetings like I am, but the information does exist. So thank you very much for answering that question. I do see one hand raised online, and if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak, I'll go to in the room next. So Jude Tillman, if you could unmute and begin your public comment.
Yes, good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you. It looked like you were about to end the meeting, and I'm listed for public expression, so I thought I'd jump on the bandwagon here. I won't. My name is Jude Tillman. I serve as the president of Mendocino Cannabis Alliance, on whose behalf I speak today. I want to say on a personal note that I do get the feeling that there are some things happening, that there's some responsiveness with the county, that some actions are taking place. My job as cleanup testifier today was to advance some of MCA's recommendations that we would like to see agendized for the December meeting, given that a lack of meeting in November kind of puts more pressure on all of us to make sure some very important topics are covered, at least in the December meeting. I was going to start right off with something that my colleagues and our legal advisor, Hannah Nelson, have already addressed quite eloquently, the veg modification clarification, which it seems is under some scrutiny and some work, and that's very exciting. I'll just underscore the need for that, no applicants be denied any permits due to veg modification concerns before there's an implementation of a solid appeals program. So that's critical. I'll leave that one alone. The second thing I was going to ask for as something for you all to consider is to hold workshop style meetings. And two things that please me greatly are, first of all, and this comes with a thank you to Deputy Clerk of the Board, Atlas Pearson, for scheduling GGC meetings monthly throughout 2023. That's excellent. We were a little nervous that wasn't going to happen. The second thing is to you, Chair Mulheron, that you've allowed for, and I appreciate, some more flexibility in the style of our exchanges today. That's really, really good. It's what we're trying to get to is the level of interaction and the depth with which we were able to pursue some of these issues over the last year with the ad hoc was really outstanding. meeting because we had more of a workshop style. We were able to dig into certain terms, identify solutions that we could never have gotten to with a 3-minute time limit at Tuesday Board of Supervisors meeting. So that's a good thing too. So getting the good things aside, let me go on to my next list on our recommendations. Please, in December, take up reducing the tax burden on our small farmers and operators. As it's already stated in ordinance section 6.32300, the board may repeal or reduce existing tax without any required voter initiatives. MCA is ready to stand to work with the standing committee or the county tax office, for that matter, to refine and develop some alternative tax structure that's going to relieve the burden a little bit. Also, we see, I think I heard you saying that you're doing a workflow analysis of MCD, and that would be really good to rectify some of the backlog and the lack of prioritization. So that would be very helpful. Also, improve communications. It's been a theme running through today's meetings, and we have a number of ways that we'd like to see improved communications in terms of changing public Zoom meetings so all attendees can see all the questions and answers, et cetera, and other things that are in our written comments we've given. I'm going to also just make, again, one personal last comment, and I'll quit, which is jumping on the bandwagon about requirements for reports on from grant recipients. I have written and submitted successfully funded grants, very large ones, very complex ones, to the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, the Alfred Sloan Foundation, Robert Woods Johnson, the California Endowment of Humanities over the years, and never has there been, I think the shortest report back period was 30 days. So the county's clearly out of step on that. So I would ask that you take a look at that, please. And thank you very much for your consideration today.
Thank you for your comments. I did want to go back to item 2B and just close that out and make sure there are no public comments in the room regarding 2B. 2B was the item we were trying to wrap up the memo. Okay, well, then let's move to public expression. I will take in the room first, and if anybody has public expression and wants to raise their hand on the Zoom, I'll be watching for the hands. Thank you.
Hi, good evening at this point, and thank you for this opportunity. As we were discussing earlier the importance of face-to-face resolution of misunderstandings, Director Nevedal expressed concern that many extra staff hours could be incurred by that kind of face-to-face, even though it's extremely important. Sometimes it is just so painful, particularly for those of us who don't have internet access at our farm. Anyway, the idea of staff hour fees tied in any way to a fee to the permittee asking for that extra level of help is just absolutely unacceptable. Earlier today, $18 million was referenced with regard to the LJAGP, with $10 million earmarked for grantees, so that would leave $8 million. And also our tax dollars. So please, and if the text I was receiving and my interpretation is wrong, I apologize, but please do not even consider a hierarchy of department assistance tied to additional fees. And, we realize that some monies are earmarked, but not all monies are earmarked. So please be aware that we are stretched to the limit, and we are relying on you to work with us and not assess additional fees. Thank you.
Michael Katz online, and then we'll go back to in the room.
Yes, hello. Thank you, supervisors. This is Michael Katz, Executive Director for the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance. I'm only going to make one comment from the memo that was submitted, and that's related to the mission statement for the Mendocino Cannabis Department. This is something that has been requested and by numerous times from multiple areas within the stakeholder community. It's clear that many departments within the county have a mission statement that really helps set the tone for what work is being done and how those departments with their clients, with their community of regulatees. And so to this point, that there has not been the time or will on the side of the department to put some time into that. So it would be my hope that through this committee and the understanding that the committee has of the board's directions and of the board itself and the supervisor's efforts to move folks through the process, that here would be a fine venue for the mission statement of the MCD to be discussed with the community in a collaborative fashion. And I hope that that can be brought to the next possible GGC meeting. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Comment in the room for public expression.
Hi, Paul Hansberry. My partner Susan and I have been advocates for a very long time. We traveled on a state level, to all the Cannabis Advisory Committee meetings. And at one point, we made up little stickers for everybody in the audience that said, "Trying to make a difference, 3 minutes at a time." Thank you, all of you, for not cutting people off at 3 minutes, for listening to us. This is why there's a need for these workshop type meetings, not necessarily every week, or even every month, but as needed, so that we can have a dialogue and we can talk back and forth and not just be limited to the 3 minutes. Even with people that were given the extra time, I'm sure they had much more they could say, and it would have been better with the dialogue back and forth. Much more could have been accomplished. So that I would strongly hope that we would be able to find some time to have a workshop types where there could be a dialogue. And I want to thank you for being so flexible today with the public comment and for listening. Thanks very much.
I do see Blair's hand raised online, so we'll go first to Blair O'Clair, and then we'll come back to in the room. And Blair, we apologize, we couldn't hear you earlier, so go ahead and unmute. We are on public expression. I didn't know if you caught that, but if you had additional comments for 2B, please give them now.
Can you hear me now?
Sounds like it. Maybe
Okay.
go right ahead.
Okay, I'll try. I just wanted to say I really appreciate you, Mo, taking the time to listen to all of us and, our voices that you've heard so many times before, over and over again. But to really have you and County Council and Kristen engage with us and be able to go back and forth a bit, because, we are individuals, but we're also here trying to represent a broader group of cultivators and who we are communicating with often, and they are looking to and relying on us to bring to you all information and gathering. And it's not just like when we hear one thing from one person, it's after we hear time and time again different things and different situations that we're trying to make solutions for, and not trying to make things more difficult, trying to make things easier, and trying to get people through the program, and trying to have a successful regulated cannabis industry here in Mendocino County. I think that obviously there's more work to be done, and I hope that these conversations continue and that we continue to do this. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And go ahead in the room. We're on public expression, and we are trying to wrap up.
Thank you, Hannah Nelson again, and I'm going to loop back around to a couple of specific items, and I do also appreciate the additional flexibility with the input today, and hope that we do have some kind of workshop style going forward. But it would be really helpful on the communication thing to have regularized public posted information, and I completely recognize how challenging it's been to get the program developed and staff trained and everything, but to the extent that things can be regularized, and then if additional special meetings needed to be added or whatever, but for example, when Ms. Nevedal, you're able to figure out a schedule again for regular MCD meetings. Right now, we don't know when they're going to be, and they're not posted anywhere until you decide. And if we could get back to regular schedule, I think that would really be helpful, because it's really hard 2 days in advance to clear your calendar and then jump in. And it's certainly important to everybody. With respect to the workflow matrix of an applicant, quite frankly, from my experience right now, at least at this juncture, I don't know that focusing on the whole chart of a new applicant is what would be the best use of staff time. And of course, you know, the department can weigh in on this, but I think that everybody who's hanging on the edge of their seat to figure out where they're at specifically now, or what's next in their upcoming processes, or more importantly, how the plan for getting everybody through all of the different workflows that have to occur is really what has been being asked for. And I recognize that in an ideal world, it would also be great to have a workflow from a beginning of an application. But right now, I think that we have so many applicants already through up to a certain point that maybe that's where we should focus. And I think it's probably not so much what do they do next, but more how does the workflow from the department look like. And so, for example, let me give a really specific example. Once let's say this new portal for the people in good standing, once they submit, we know about that, we know about the corrections portal, but when their application is reviewed and they're given an application complete, how are they fitting into the workflow with the prior portal people or the renewals? And are the referrals going out right away to both CDFW and to, if they're still going to the district attorney for the live scanner conviction check? Is that happening right away, or does that happen way later? And are the efficiencies being maximized, or are there? Because I think that that's the kind of information where people are just like, I don't know what's going on, and it's just a black hole of information. It's not to say that that there's nothing going on. It's just that there's not the communication on how that's being mapped out. So that would be helpful. Then with respect to just going back to the SSHR screening tool, really, we're not asking for streambed experts or wetlands experts or anything of the sort. It's really just about matching the tool with the current water board rules, and that was all. And Acela and renewals, oh my gosh, yay, can't wait. And a good thing is, and I know that Ms. Nevedal has indicated this in prior meetings, that like every applicant at this point uses Acela already. They have a state license. That's the system that the state. We suggested years ago that we use that system, but hey, it's happening now. That's fantastic. And it's so great to hear that eventually there's a contemplation of renewals being that easy if there's no modifications. And that's the kind of information that's just so ideal to hear. And if that's known by the department, why not send a canon note and let everybody know this? Also, with respect to Acela, what is the implementation timeline? I hear that it's coming to the board really soon, but assuming the contract gets approved, then how long is it anticipated before it actually comes online? So just information like that being pushed out to the public is really, I think, the most useful thing at this point. And then I echo what Susan said about potentially using and I always get this confused, LJAGP instead of GAP funds for meeting with applicants. I think that, again, we have to look at context. It's been 5.5 years, 6 department heads or managers, 3 different departments, changing, refining rules, and going back and realizing certain things need to be different or whatever to meet the actual requirements. No problem, but that kind of ability to meet with staff on all of this stuff and new processes is really critical. And it's not them who changed. It's everything around them that changed. Sure, people have changes in their site plans or whatever, but really the processes have changed around them. So I think that if there's a way for the department to get their staff time reimbursed by charging the LJAGP grant, that's a wonderful solution. There's funding there, and at the same time, it's not burdened on the applicant. And thank you again so much for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Do we have any more public expression in the room or online? I have public expression in the room.
Thank you. My name is Chantal Simon Pietro. I got all your names right this time. Sorry, Mr. Curtis. I had to run my child home. I'm back now. So whatever I missed, I missed. But I'll come in with what my follow-ups are. I have 4 points and then one question. The first one, again, comes back to the workflow conversation. And the suggestion from the stakeholders is that a diagram be created that specifically outlines the cannabis department's internal current processing system for all categories of applications and timelines. To be specific, it's internal, not outward facing. We don't need to know what the applicant needs to do. We want to know what is going on inside of the department, specific to each of the different categories. And current, and I love the idea of the future forward-facing, a ideal perspective of a new applicant as of tomorrow. What would their process look like? And I write workflows often, and they're only as good as they're applied, and they're very much like sometimes just a moment in time of how things are going on at that moment. So I respect that it may be what we're asking for is something that would give us clear indication of current processing times, poor application, and status, so that we can then help the department refine the processes to be more efficient. The different categories are the first portal, the second portal, good standing, modifications, and renewals. All 5 of those have different processes that they're going through currently. And just basically, even with excellent sharing of information, I think what's being pointed out is there still is a gap of information that the outside here on this side of this wooden barrier, we are still not clear consistently given the same information as far as what's going on with applications inside of the department. And it's not any fault of Ms. Nevedal or the excellent job that you're doing. It is just, it's an extremely complex process over many years with multiple changes. The second request stems off of that, also to ask for the cannabis department to please return to conducting regular meetings. And I spoke with Ms. Mulherin about this in person, and I spoke about it earlier today too, is there's still a perception and I believe a reality of there being a lack of rapport between the regulated and the regulators. And there was a period of time during the regular cannabis meetings where I felt some of those boundaries come down and there began to be trust between the cultivation community and the cannabis department and Ms. Nevedal in particular, not her as an individual, but just between the department. And I recommend this for overall well-being of our community, that continued regular calendared and with at least 2 weeks notice, twice a month meetings of the cannabis department until we're through processing all of the phase 1 people through to either application accepted or denied. That be the time period of how long we need these meetings to continue. My third comment has to do back to the SSHR conversation. And to be very specific, that if you want like specifics of recommended changes, that the dates be aligned again, whether it be, I don't remember the dates exactly, it's 8/26/16 or 1/1/16, whatever the date is, that it be the one that is reflective of the MND, not more restrictive than that. And I believe the one that's in the screening tool goes back in time by about 8 months prior. And so we're asking for it to be what's actually required by law is the later date. And that's another area where the screening tool ends up being over-referring because it's using a date and time that's 7 months prior than it should be. And also to replace the specific language of no impact with a less than significant impact, to echo on what Blair brought up specifically. Regarding the LJAGP program, I made 2 recommendations. for outside communication with DFW, and one of those was picked up on, but the second one, which actually the first one that I was made was more significant, that the Cannabis Department refer the manual to the Enforcement and Permitting Division of DFW, not just Virginia O'Rourke, who's the director of the Cannabis Restoration Grant Program. She has a lot of knowledge about cannabis. She's a Fort Bragg resident, but she is not the person handling permitting and compliance. And if the LJAGP program is designed to assist people with attaining compliance, then the Cannabis Department should consult with that regulatory agency in order for that program to be most effective. And lastly, I just wanted, before the end, however we do it, can we get a clarification on what is on the 1212 GGC agenda as far as what this meeting has determined? I've got an idea, but I'm not clear what things are actually going to be back on that one, so we can begin to prepare our public comment appropriately. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Are there any more public comments? And I will check for online. I do not see any hands raised. Before I go to Supervisor Jurdy for any public comment, clearly several of the things that were expressed today during the meeting are included in the public expression memo that was submitted by the MCA. Some of the things were discussed, like the veg mod clarification coming back. I know that we can't agendize all of these things today. I think that being able to have monthly meetings with the General Government Committee next year is going to be incredibly helpful. I also, I know the department worked really, really diligently to provide weekly meetings to the community, and at some point there does need to be a shift in the way that that monthly meeting or regular meeting with the community happens. And I do understand that presented a less formal process than being in the board chambers, although I do believe that the GGC is going to be a really important piece of cannabis policy moving forward in Mendocino County, so that it is done with transparency and for more communication from all of the stakeholders of the cannabis industry. So I would like, as the chair, to be able to work with the department to possibly map out some 2023 agenda items to kind of make sure that we're able to give the department enough time to bring forward those items and be able to answer the questions that are being brought up in this memo, if that's agreeable with Supervisor Jurdy. And also knowing that in December we will meet and decide who is going to be on this committee for next year, and that may not be me, but I'm happy to maybe work with the department and bring an item back for the December meeting that kind of outlines what some possible future GGC topics are, so that there's a template for next year so that the community has expectations. Supervisor Jurdy, is that?
I think that sounds like a good suggestion. I think it'd be great for people to, all members of the public, to have an outline for the agenda for the next year.
Okay. Do we have anything else? We have item 3B, announcements. Clerk, could you just review, or maybe Director Nevedal, for December 12th, we're going to have back County Council's analysis of VegMod, correct?
That's correct, in the draft affidavit.
Okay, great. And then were there any other agenda items that we were going to specifically have for 1212?
Not that I've recorded.
Okay, well, we can work together maybe and try to think about how much time that item is going to take, and then figure out if we can add some additional agenda items that relate to the public expression memo. Wow. Public expression memo. I think I skipped lunch today. So, and then get what we can on December 12th and then map out 2023. Supervisor Jurdy, do you need to adjourn or move the adjournment, or shall I just do it myself?
I think you have that power.
All right. I don't see anything else. So we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Appreciate it.